Chapter 38. From the Apostle Islands, the waters of Lake Superior flow through the narrow rapids at Sault Ste. Marie to Lake Huron, where they join the waters of Lake Michigan. On the extreme southern reach of Lake Huron, the waters pass through the Detroit River, past Lake St. Clair, and into Lake Erie. Upon going over the Niagara Falls, the waters enter Lake Ontario, which narrow into the St. Lawrence River. Because of its strategic location to both Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, Albany shifted from a key military outpost to the seat of government for New York by the winter of 1837. It somehow reminds me of my childhood home along the Black Sea, Krasden Cry reflected. Despite the deeply wooded valleys of rural New York, his foreign home and the home of George Fanshawe could have been on different planets. Once the carriage stopped, Cry secured his satchel and walking stick. The driver's son opened the door and tried to help him out, which Cry ignored. The boy handed him his top hat, which he slipped onto his head for a short trek across the yard. "I'll be staying in town," Cry said when he saw the boy climbing onto the carriage to get the other bags. "This should only take a few minutes." "Yes, sir." George Fanshawe stood at the front door already, watching Cry approach. The tall Englishman had drinks ready and waiting, but his solemn expression contrasted the gesture. "Does Fanshawe think he's a loose end?" Cry did not carry dagger, pistol, and poison, but these were not the instruments he'd used to dispatch the official United States geologist. "Mr. Cry, welcome to Albany. The letter said you would not be staying, but my wife made some refreshments for you nevertheless." "The obligation of hospitality is one of my old tricks, a lesson he'll understand when I leave every drop and morsel exactly as I received them." The walking stick and satchel prevented Fanshawe from shaking hands, leaving him to only gesture to the plush chair on the porch. Cry set the heavy bag down at his toes and leaned the ivory head of his walking stick at his side. Inside the fashionable item was a narrow blade that could pierce a man's throat from across a table. "You've done quality work in recent years." "Thank you, Mr. Cry. It has been a grueling few years, and only in recent weeks have I felt like my old self." "You've done quality work in recent years." "Thank you, Mr. Cry. It has been a grueling few years, and only in recent weeks have I begun to feel like my old self." "Your work in identifying malcontents and subversives within the Cherokee nations has reaped great rewards. We believe that by next May, the remnants of the Cherokee Nation will be moved from Georgia to Oklahoma without any resistance." "Cut the head off of the snake," Fanshawe said, "and the body will die. To Lady Columbia." Cry raised the cup but did not sip, which Fanshawe noticed without response. Cry then reached down for the heavy satchel and set it between the cup and plate of food. "Your back pay and severance pay." Fanshawe blinked as he sorted through the message, but did not reach for the tens of thousands of dollars in front of him. "Is he not pleased with my work?" "Quite the opposite. He was thrilled to read about your tour of the region, especially your trip on the, how was it said, Minnesotor," Fanshawe finished. "Minnesotor. It means clear blue water," which was certainly not the case. "If he is pleased with my work, then why is this considered severance pay? I am a devoted disciple of your zeal is noted, which is why your time here in America is coming to an end. Think of it as a game of chess in which an important piece is being moved to another region of the board. As always, he is thinking decades ahead of the present. In that satchel, you'll not only find a reward for your tour of Minnesota territory, but also money to return to England, with enough funds to even buy a vacation home in France. Fanshawe reached for the bag and slid it across the table, eyeing it cautiously. In what capacity will I be returning to England? Your time as United States geologist and explorer has made you the perfect diplomat to negotiate border disputes between the United States and England. Really? A diplomat? Yes. Our next phase appears to be the Upper Missouri in the Rockies. The Oregon Territory. Yes. I just returned from a terribly boring trip up that forsaken river last spring. You went up the Missouri? Yes. I took a steamship from St. Louis all the way to a remote outpost called Fort Union to remove a pawn from the chessboard. We do our duty to humanity, don't we? We do our duty, Fanshawe repeated morosely. A few years ago, prior to your expedition, you were given copies of a map to aid in your geological assessment. Have you destroyed those copies as instructed? Destroyed and forgotten. Good, Cry nodded, only to feel the pain of a festering wound. Unfortunately, there has been a bit of excitement in Washington in recent days. Joseph Nicollet returned from Fort Snelling as part of a diplomatic entourage negotiating a treaty between the Chippewa and Sioux. Yes, I've read. It received so much attention that Colonel Hebert had no other choice than to hire Nicollet to save face after Nicollet bragged about the veracity of his map compared to its predecessors. He is an arrogant man. I wrote to Hebert that he had made a monstrous blunder in hiring Nicollet. I met the man once in St. Louis. If only I'd found him in St. Louis. When Cry arrived in St. Louis to locate Nicollet himself, he learned the mapmaker had gone on to Fort Snelling without any funds. Cry waited for a year only to receive another covert mission. The trip to Fort Union. When he returned from the mission, Nicollet had already gone through St. Louis and up the Ohio to return to Washington, D.C. Yes, arrogant, but also very capable man. Now that he has government funding, there will be little preventing him from following his imagination. With that being said, I have a very serious question to ask. Fanshawe swallowed hard and nodded. Will Nicollet find Fort LaHoulier? Fanshawe had to temper his reaction, which began with incredulity, shifted to fear, and finally settled into stern confidence. The legend is a lie. There certainly is no copper. The 7-mile volcanic mountain cloaked in mist is a dream, and this place where water flows in all directions is an impossibility. Nicollet will find mosquitoes, sunburn, and hostile savages. If any savages remain by spring, Cry added, grabbing his walking stick by the ivory head, carved into the likeness of a skull. Chapter 39. Kit Carson's eyes were open, but the nightmare did not end. A year earlier, the Mandan village of Metutahakato had been a thriving community along the banks of the Missouri River, but now it was a ghost town. The angel of death had claimed more than just his beautiful wife, Singing Grass. With her arms wrapped around his waist, his daughter Adeline proved to be far luckier than the residents of the village, which was now overgrown with untamed vegetation from the Mandan farmers. Unlike other tribes on the prairie, the Mandans left the Mandan or Mandans. The Mandans left behind homes of earthen domes decorated with white buffalo skulls and ornamental poles that reminded Carson of flagpoles. He heard a voice, and his rifle stock leapt to his cheek. An Arikara boy stepped around the corner of a home with an armful of vegetables, only to freeze in his tracks when he saw Carson staring at him from behind the sights of a rifle. 1 second, I'm going to see if you spell sites with a G or just T-E. This is editing. If you're listening to this, you got it for free anyways. Two other Arikara youths came around the corner and also paused when they saw the horse and rickshaw behind it. Carson's pile of furs was all that he had left, and he meant to protect it. But the three youths were the only living souls he'd seen in months. "Who are you? Where do you come from?" Like poor Adeline, the boys had survived smallpox over the winter and were left with the facial scarring. The Arikara boys told him that what had happened and elsewhere on the plains. Of the 2,000 Mandans who lived in Mitutakato, only 27 survived and had been taken in by their neighbors to the north. During the terrible winter that followed, the Arikara learned of the fates of other neighboring tribes. To the west, 2/3 of the Blackfoot died, and 1/3 of the Crow. Along the upper Missouri River, half the Assiniboine, Arikara, and Pawnee died. "What of the Sioux?" Carson asked. The Arikara boy shook his head. "It is difficult to estimate, but the Lakota in the west and the Dakota in the east were not spared. We've just come from Fort Union, and it is worse upriver. Have you been to Fort Clark? They kept us away with their guns." The furs and the rickshaw were enough to purchase passage on the next steamer. He could then bring Adeline back to his family in Missouri. A year earlier, Carson had shared drinks with a man by the name of Captain Daniel Lyons, who bragged about being part of the Nicollet expedition. The same man later sold him infected blankets, killing his precious sweetgrass and scarring his daughter. "Once Adeline is safe, I will find Lyons and kill him. If only I could kill him 1,000 times." If Lyons remained at Fort Clark, no man alive could stop his wrath. But Carson doubted fate would be so kind. Father Pierre-Jean de Smet felt his fist clench as he walked down the streets of St. Louis. But so much had changed in 4 years he'd been gone, that he had to ask directions in a town that I helped build. It was no longer the charming metropolitan filled with hope. Now it behaved like every other city, filled with corruption and vice. A journey of almost 20,000 miles ended with a loud knock on Joseph Nicollet's hotel door. A young military officer with hair parted down the middle answered the door. Before he could even ask, "Can I help you?" De Smet noted the differences in the uniform from others he'd seen. It belonged to the United States Corps of Topographical Engineers. "Who are you?" DeSmet asked. "Lieutenant John C. Fremont," the young man said. "And who are you?" Joseph Nicollet answered, "That is Father DeSmet, Johnny, a friend and an ally. Invite him in." Nicollet also had changed during the time DeSmet was abroad. His curly black hair now represented the minority in a head of gray. He wasn't as plump as he'd been, but his skin was tan and his frame seemed taut after 2 years in the North. The man seemed even more energetic, and the twinkle in his eyes conveyed unbridled optimism. "Come in, Father DeSmet," Fremont said, stepping aside. Along with Fremont, 2 others sat in the room. Nicollet wore a new outfit, including a bright blue vest beneath his jacket. In the corner chair, a tall, smooth-faced métis sat in modern clothing. A Cree, by the looks of him. "I looked for you at White Marsh, where you were all but a distant memory," DeSmet said coldly in reference to the Jesuit complex back in Maryland. "We have private matters to discuss, and I do not know these 2 men." "Then let me introduce you," Nicollet said, rising from the couch. "I do not want introductions. I want them to leave." Nicollet's smile vanished, and his back straightened a bit. As it so happens, Antoine was leaving anyway. Nicollet first shook hands with the tall métis, but then pulled in for an embrace. "I will find a way without you. Stuart needs you more than I do at this point. It warms my heart to think of you in a Scottish castle. Farewell." Lieutenant Fremont stood his ground, watching as the tall métis walked out the door, but then turning his eyes to Nicollet. But then "See to our provisions," Nicollet said to Fremont. "Our steamer returns to Fort Snelling in 2 days, and I do not want anything misplaced or left behind." "Yes, Professor Nicollet," Fremont said, and closed the door solidly behind him. DeSmet would hear the military. DeSmet could hear the military boots echo down the hall. "You are in league with the devil," DeSmet announced. "Devils, in fact. I am surrounded by devils," Nicollet boasted, returning to the couch, gesturing to the chair that had been filled by Fremont moments earlier. Upon the table were layers of maps, old and new. "One of the devils attempted to kill me a few months ago. When the man's blood splattered on my face, it may as well have been Lady Drummond's blood, for I am still trying to escape from her shadow. I assume you've spoken to your superiors in Rome?" "Yes, and Conrad Simmons agrees that you are a madman." "I am only trying to keep myself alive. And," Nicollet smiled wryly, "I hope you understand why I still cannot accept your help." Help you? Okay. Exploring the headwaters of the Mississippi is only the beginning." "Yet you will accept the help of politicians who are only using you for their own foul purposes." "Awareness of a trap makes it easier to avoid," Nicollet mused. "I've seen the face of my enemy, and I know I am being used. Dangling promotions in front of ambitious young men will get them to do the most foul things." "Yes, I know. One of the men on your foolhardy trip to the Mississippi was one of my men." "Your man? Davy?" "Perhaps he is not a total fool." "Fremont is not to be trusted. Fremont is predictable. The others want me to find it. They've been looking for quite a while with no success, and I offered them a little bit of hope, which is why they now help me. Knowing they are watching, I will muddy the waters and leave them bewildered. Do you remember speaking to me of Chief Wahanaton?" "Of course," DeSmet said, having heard all the strange legends prior to departing. "I believe he is key to understanding all of the legends. Correctu decorde, for Chief Wahanoton had enough wherewithal to send a spy into my camp, one who saved my life. The spy waits for me back at Fort Snelling, and when the opportunity presents itself, he will take me to Wahanoton, who wishes to speak to me. I wish I could join you on this expedition instead of tending my flock. Simmons was right when he picked you, even though I could not see the wisdom at the time. But there are factors you do not yet understand. Really? What sort of factors? I need to speak plainly to you about a common enemy we share. Chapter 41. Sergeant Jim Tyope sat under a cottonwood tree sharpening his knife when a cannon announced the coming of a steamer up the Mississippi. On the opposite bank, old Betts emerged from her shack in anticipation of ferrying parasites to the landing below Fort Snelling. Nicollet took too long to return. With Major Tolliver still in Washington, D.C., chaos greeted the big paddle ship as it came around the corner. Soldiers from Snelling, refugees from the Red River Colony, traders who'd wintered in simple shacks, Sioux from nearby Kaposia, Indian agents, and even Hank Sibley soon appeared by the docks. Tyope spit on his whetstone and continued sharpening his knife. 2 months earlier, Sibley had received a letter that Nicollet would return with a fully funded expedition, which brightened everyone's mood, for it meant an influx of government money would be arriving with the paddle ship. Since that day, Sibley had been arranging for wagons, horses and mules, and rations, as well as men for the expedition. Dozens of voyagers had lined up at Sibley's house, hoping to be selected as hired hands for the expedition west. A few days later, Hank Sibley came to Tyope. I'm looking to hire a Sioux guide for the Nicollet expedition, Sibley had said. You're already familiar with the man, and we need someone who knows the Sioux tribes west of here. Red Blanket Woman said you've bounced around between these tribes as a young man. Tyope nodded. Major Tolliver has already hired me for his purposes. If you're looking for a proper guide, Joe LaFrambo is heading back out to the Great Oasis. He knows the territory. Or Renville. He lives out on the upper St. Peter. Both Renville and LaFrambo are intent on heading back as soon as the spring floods recede. I know you're Tolliver's man, but I could arrange for a small bonus on my end. Sibley wanted to hire men cheaply so he could pocket the profits, and after stubbornly refusing the entitled manager, Tyope managed to negotiate the selection of the other men, except for Big Mo Maxwell, who Sibley had already hired as the expedition cook. With his 8 voyagers ready, Tyope now watched as Nicollet's men disembarked from the ship. Crates of supplies, including a massive yellow telescope, were brought to the 6 wagons Sibley had procured. Knowing Nicollet would not be so foolish as to introduce Tyope to the others, he simply watched and noted them. There was a young officer dressed in a uniform Tyope had never seen. The enthusiastic young man barked out orders like a seasoned general. A well-dressed teenage boy came next, nervously following the crowd as it flowed out of the ship. Next came a pair of wide-eyed tourists who let others carry their bags while they took in the scenic view below Fort Snelling. In their zeal, he heard French phrases uttered. Walking the plank with Nicollet was another gentle-looking soul, albeit a few years younger, whom Nicollet personally escorted. Finally, the ship began to take on cargo and passengers heading back to St. Louis. No Brunia on this trip. Tyope observed. I will have to deliver the terrible news myself. Tyope followed the crowd back up the long slope to Fort Snelling, knowing he needed to be an afterthought to Nicollet. Hank Sibley soon stole Nicollet, the young lieutenant, and the other 3 gentlemen back to the company outpost so that Red Blanket Woman could provide a hearty supper. By the next day, Taopi learned the names of the men who would be joining the expedition. John C. Fremont, an officer in the United States Corps of Topographical Engineers. Viscount de Montmort, a French attaché. Gaspard de la Beligny, a French tourist. Eugene Flandine, the son of a wealthy French merchant. And Charles Geyer, a German botanist Nicollet had recently befriended during his stay in St. Louis. Edgar Colton had been at Snelling for more than a year before he turned into a snake. I wonder if I will have to bury any of these men. With his oversized hat protecting his scars from the sun, Taopi sat in the shadows of the western gate, watching people come and go. Finally, Nicollet and his pack of gentlemen passed by on their way out. "Sergeant Taopi," Nicollet said, stopping. "I've been told you are going to accompany us on the expedition. Johnny, this is Sergeant Jim Taopi." The young lieutenant grew wide-eyed when he gazed upon Taopi's deformed cheek. So for good measure, Taopi removed his hat to reveal the patch of pink atop his head left from the Chippewa blade. "Lieutenant." "Johnny, could you bring the others over to Mr. Sibley? I'd like to review the supplies with Sergeant Taopi for a moment." As Fremont led the gentleman away, Taopi put his hat back on and stood up with a grunt, walking back through the gate ahead of Nicollet. 9 wagons waited in line from the storehouse all the way to the blacksmith shop. When Taopi reached the lead wagon, he leaned against it to face Nicollet. 9 wagons? I was led to believe we only had funding for 7. "That's true. But a week before you arrived, traders came with news that there were war parties attacking posts in the west." "War parties? Again?" "Death has come to the prairie, and now the people's enemies of the 7 council fires test the resolve of my people. We're not sure of the details, but neither Renville nor Laframbo wanted to risk losing their own supplies, so they've added their wagons to our expedition to make 9. "What about the men you hired? Can we trust them?" "We know Mo is a thief and agent of Sibley, but the others are just simple men looking for an easy way to make money. There's some bad news, I must tell you." "Yes, I've heard all about the rumors of illness on the prairie. I've brought vaccines for any Indian willing to receive it." "Too late for that also, I am afraid." "It is another matter. Have there been questions about Corporal Colton?" "Yes, especially from Sibley, who paid a small ransom for anyone who could find the whereabouts of Corporal Colton." "Sibley is an intermediary for someone looking for Colton. Have you learned anything else about the letter in his pocket? Was Colton paid by Schoolcraft?" "Schoolcraft and Sibley have been in constant correspondence, but Schoolcraft never once inquired about Colton. I do not think he was involved in the assassination attempt." "That would surprise me. If you knew Schoolcraft as well as you have other enemies besides white men, you will not be able to return north. Evil has spread through all the lands." "Shagobay is dead," Taopi finally said. "His own people killed him." Chapter 42. On the other side of the prairie, hundreds of miles to the east, Chief Sleepy Eyes grit his teeth as a wave of pain passed through his body. His hand gently supported the wound at the bottom of his ribcage as he sat up, and except for the blinding flash of pain, the scar seemed to hold his torn muscles. Will this wound ever heal? At the door of his teepee, his eldest surviving son stood wide-eyed as he watched his father rise from his bed. Once Sleepy Eyes caught his breath, his son answered him. "They have crossed the Minnesota River," Manza Astegmani told him. Looking at his son, Sleepy Eyes knew the boy would soon be of fighting age. He had named him One Who Walks with Iron, but his son was not yet a killer. "I hope he never has to kill a man face to face as I have." "Are you certain it is him?" He wears a green vest instead of a red vest, but he has curly hair and no beard, and whenever they stop, he measures the sky and stars. It must be Nicollet, the great sorcerer. "Bring me my war bonnet," Sleepy Eyes demanded, fighting the nausea that passed after he rose from his sick bed. Pretty Water, his wife, stood up as if to block his passage. "You are not leaving here. Your wound has only begun to heal." "Bring me my war bonnet," Sleepy Eyes shouted, only to wince in pain. Iron Walker ignored the glare from Pretty Water and immediately left to bring his father's headdress and other ornamental clothing. "Help me out of these rags." Pretty Water stood with her arms crossed, with tears in her eyes. She had been strong enough to help run the village for the past months, yet resigned herself to the command of her chief. She dutifully helped Sleepy Eyes from his sickbed and pulled the cotton shirt over his head and shoulders. Sleepy Eyes looked down at his wound, just inches below his heart. The pink wound still showed signs of infection. "Perhaps I am cursed for going where I should not have gone." Although the wound had quickly closed the previous fall, it had become infected twice during the winter and had to be lanced. A month earlier, inspired by the warming weather, Sleepy Eyes had gone hunting with his son, only to see the wound fester and swell again, bringing with it a terrible fever. "He should be coming to you," Pretty Water insisted as she washed the wound a final time. "You are the chief here at Swan Lake. You rule in the land of the Sisseton." "This Nicollet is special. He is a servant of the Great Mystery, and will humble myself by going to him," Sleepy Eyes insisted. "How can you be sure?" Pretty Water asked as she slipped new deerskin clothes onto her husband's massive body. "Tiope told me everything I need to know about the man, and a dead man told me the rest." "Is that why you waged war and risked your life last summer? Because of the testimony of a half-breed?" "I did what needed to be done. Tiope is an honorable man, a man who can be trusted. Everything he spoke to me was true, and I knew what I was doing when I rode south." "I hope you know what you're doing now. Your people need you. Your family needs you. If I do not fix this, there will be no people. I must lift the curse." Sleepy Eyes kissed the top of her head. "There is no danger today. I will ride out with a dozen of my best warriors under an American flag." This time, Pretty Water did not argue, and by the time Iron Walker returned with the headdress, Sleepy Eyes was clothed again. The war bonnet added another foot to his already unmatched height of 7 feet. When he had received it from his father, it already had 36 bald eagle feathers, but after 3 decades as chief, his bonnet now flowed more than 3 feet down his back. Each carefully wrapped quill marked a significant victory during his life. After the headdress was placed upon his head, his wife and son continued to adorn their patriarch with frilled aprons painted with red and blue. "Fetch the letter and your sister," Sleepy Eyes said. Iron Walker left immediately, but Pretty Water stood with hands on her hips. "Why are you bringing Yellow Medicine with you?" "Laframbo will be with them. You and I know what happened last summer. This will set matters straight." "She is your youngest daughter." After his son found and pinned the blue eagle upon his chest, Sleepy Eyes stepped out of his lodge to where Yellow Medicine waited, her head low. Nearly 100 men, women, and children waited with wide eyes outside his lodge. His head held high, Sleepy Eye bathed in the moment as they whooped and hollered their chief's return from death's bed. "My people need a victory," Sleepy Eyes realized. "I hope they understand what I am about to do." Despite the pain and consequence, Sleepy Eye vaulted onto his horse, again inspiring those who watched. "Fetch a horse," he said to his son. "You are coming with us." The war party rode fiercely out of the village to inspire the children, but by the time they reached the Cottonwood River, they slowed to a trot. Two of his scouts rode ahead at the confluence of the Cottonwood and Minnesota rivers. Okay, that had rode ahead, and they returned. Okay. There are 9 wagons camped just east of Swan Lake, the eldest of the scouts informed him. Go inform them that Chief Sleepy Eyes is coming. An hour before dawn, they found the party. Even though there were enough men in the expedition to neutralize his dozen warriors in just a few minutes, none of the men even held a gun. From a distance, Sleepy Eyes recognized the thick mustache of Joe Laframbo, who often traded with his people along the Cottonwood River. He also knew the dark-skinned, short-haired son of Joseph Renville, another man of good reputation. Greetings, Chief Sleepy Eyes of the Sisseton, Laframbo began. We come as friends and welcome you to join us at our fires. We have goodwill and presents to exchange. Sleepy Eyes heard the words, but looked right past the fur trader to the clean-shaven little man. With wide eyes and curly hair, the man in the green vest looked more like a boy than a man, but after his conversations with Tiope, Sleepy Eyes knew he had indeed found Nicollet. The stench of the Americans was palpable, masked only by the roaring fire and the smell of game killed from the hunting grounds of his people. The toothless man who brought him a plate of food smelled the worst, but Nicollet, sitting 4 seats away from him at the fire, smelled as if he had a vest stuffed with lilac blossoms. For an hour, Laframbo dominated the conversation, speaking to him in Sioux, repeating again and again that they meant no harm or disrespect with their expedition. On the edges of the camp, he spotted the grim Tiope standing with the other men. The longer Sleepy Eyes waited, the more gifts piled in front of him. Laframbo understood who ruled the territory, even after the terrible winter. It fills my heart with joy that Laframbo has returned from the stone house to his home in the land of the muskrats, Sleepy Eye nodded. I have brought my youngest daughter, Yellow Medicine, who will bear him strong children that will make him proud. Sleepy Eyes watched as the hardened fur trader softened into a puddle of tears at the notion. You honor me with a gift that cannot be matched. You are a friend of the Sioux, and if we need to survive in the coming days, we will need friends such as yourself, as well as Nicollet. Sleepy Eyes reached into his pocket and handed Nicollet the letter. It is a letter from President Monroe, Nicollet explained to the others. It says that Chief Sleepy Eyes of Swan Lake is a friend of the white man. Tell him that I also have been a visitor to the White House. Sleepy Eyes did not need to wait for Laframbo to translate. Having received a vision from the Great Mystery, Sleepy Eyes had changed from the ways of his father, knowing that a flood of white men was coming. 13 years earlier, he had traveled all the way to Washington, D.C. to witness the majesty of the white man, and since returning, learned as much English as he could to help guide his people through the coming days. Although he struggled to find the right English words, he understood most of what the men said. Nicollet handed back the letter, which Sleepy Eyes tucked back into his pocket. You will have safe passage through the land of the Sioux, Sleepy Eyes promised, but I cannot guarantee your safety farther west, because where you go, our enemies throng. For that reason, I will give you my son, Ironwalker, who is the dearest thing to me on earth. My heart will rejoice if he dies fighting for the whites. Laframbo quickly translated to Nicollet, who immediately shook his head. But the first present was not negotiable, which Laframbo explained, to which Nicollet replied, I will answer for his life with mine, or remain on the prairie with him. Tiope was right about this man, Sleepy Eyes thought, after hearing the sincerity of Nicollet's words, even if he smells like flowers. So when Nicollet produced a barrel of gunpowder, the limits placed on the gift did not surprise him. Sleepy Eyes knew the tale of Tiope. After Tiope's white father died, his mother remarried a white fur trader, only to be widowed again a few years after his half-brother Job was born. while his mother and brother struggled to survive at the mercy of fur traders. Tyopi flourished on the frontier. Through his actions and deeds, he earned the trust of Chief Wahanaten of the Yankton tribe, who sent him back to the east to be Jim Tyopi. "This is only for hunting," Nicollet explained through Laframboise. "Your scalp will hang in your enemy's lodge if you carry it with you to war." Despite being a little man, Nicollet spoke fiercely. Sleepy Eyes waited deep into the night before unveiling his true purpose in the visit. The son of Renville retired to sleep, and that was when Tyopi approached Nicollet, taking over the duty of translation, and both soldier and brave slept in the shadows of the fire, their bellies full. 2 years ago, Sleepy Eyes explained through Tyopi, I heard rumors of war brewing between the northern Sioux and the Chippewa. I also heard about a Frenchman who brought peace between the two nations at the stone house. Last fall, I heard about a Tzaptanen man bragging that he had killed Chippewa women on the Crow Wing River. Knowing that the Tzaptanens protected this man, I sent a messenger to demand this man be brought forth to answer for his crime. The Tzaptanens sent back my messenger pierced with many arrows. Sleepy Eyes waited for the story to be relayed to Nicollet, who began to cry softly before wiping away the tears. Tyopi explained the reason to Sleepy Eyes. Although war between the Chippewa and Sioux was averted, the pillagers took the news poorly. As Shagobay, the Chippewa holy man, traveled back to his home along the Crow Wing, a band of pillagers fell upon Shagobay and young Nanaconan, and unable to find the man who'd murdered the women, they placed Shagobay in a fire. Once the fires raged, they released Nanaconan, offering him a chance to free his tortured father. Twice the boy entered the flames to try to free his father's bonds, as the cruel men laughed, and on the third attempt, now badly burned, the boy ran through the flames and out into the woods. Nicollet raised the curly hair above his brow to show Sleepy Eyes a scar above his hairline. Yes, Sleepy Eye nodded. You are lucky to have lived. I rallied my men and waged war upon the band of Tzaptanens that protected Hansi, this murderer and sower of war. We found him hiding in an unholy land surrounded by many waters and rivers. We set up a net, spreading our forces thin. Knowing the Tzaptanens are cowards, we waited until this net was cast before riding into their camp. At the burned fort, I found your attacker. Leaping from my horse, I fought him to the death, despite being greatly outnumbered. One of his friends stabbed me in the side after I laid his killer low, but unable to subdue me, they fled. Most of them were routed as they fled like ants exposed to the sunlight. Again, Sleepy Eyes waited for Tyopi to translate, but when the half-breed finished relating the tale, Nicollet became speechless. That was when Sleepy Eye turned to his trusted friend to retrieve the first gift. Knowing how you brought peace to the land, and what happened to you back at the Crow Wing River, I give this gift to you to carry with you in the lands of the West. The leather pouch was given to Nicollet, who opened it and removed the long hair attached to the scalp of Ohansi of the Tzaptanen. Now the cowardly Tzaptanens will know to fear both the President of the United States and Sleepy Eyes, chief of the Sisseton at Pretty Water by the big trees in Swan Lake. Sleepy Eyes whispered to his son, who stood up and walked away from the fire. A moment later, he returned with a green wooden box that he set next to Nicollet. After slaying Ohansi, I found this wooden box filled with maps and books and maps. Sleepy Eyes explained as Nicollet's eyes grew wide. I knew that it must belong to the Wakchan Wittashtan. Wakchan Wittashtan? Nicollet repeated, clutching the green box on his lap. I don't know how to put it, Taupi explained. They call you the magician spirit, the great man, the philosopher, Wakchan Witchashtan, a magi. Yet it is Sleepy Eyes who has produced the only true miracle, Nicollet added. I thought this chest was lost to me. Sleepy Eyes watched as Nicollet carefully opened the chest, which included the wampum belt that once belonged to one of the Glusta. Nicollet watched over his shoulder to see who else had stayed up late into the night. After a night of feasting, most of the party had fallen asleep or drifted away from the fire, leaving them alone. Nicollet's fingers gently sifted through the manuscripts and papers until he finally closed his eyes and prayed to his god in the sky. For the past several months, the chest had been a source of intrigue for Sleepy Eyes, who pored over its contents while healing from his wound. Ohanzi hunted for the same thing you seek, Sleepy Eyes explained, causing Nicollet to close the chest. Nicollet picked up the dried scalp of the murdered man, studied the mass of hair for a moment, before slipping it back into the leather pouch. You seek Makato, Sleepy Eyes said. Makato? The place where the earth bleeds blue, Sleepy Eyes said. For many nights I stayed awake, unable to sleep because of the wound to my ribs. While I could not read the words in your books, I could see the drawings made by the men who had visited Makato. The drawings in these books are fictitious, Nicollet said. They describe a land where the rivers flow in 4 directions. Yes, and that place is Makato. Nicollet shook his head. No, I followed the Mississippi all the way to the source, and all I found were swamps and creeks. There was no Spirit Lake or Turtle Island at the end of the quest. Yet you head into certain danger, past the land of the Red Pipestone, to seek out the Plateau du Coteau, where the waters flow to the north as the Red River and to the south as the Minnesota River. I tell you again, you seek the same thing as Ohanzi. The small man took a moment to gather his thoughts. He looked at the stars for a moment before peering across the fire to Sleepy Eyes. Tell me more about Makato. For a long time, the Dakota fiercely protected this location from enemies of all sorts, but now it is a cursed place, a place where an evil spirit slumbers. Fools like Ohanzi have only angered the spirit, pouring out disease and pestilence upon our land. I prayed to the great mystery that he would send one to cleanse and purify the land. Nicollet then pulled out the wampum belt of the Glusta tribe. Do you know this? Yes, Sleepy Eye admitted. The Glusta came to me to seek permission to enter the haunted valley, to look for clues about the key of death. When Tiope finished translating, he spoke directly to Nicollet. At Minnewakan, one of the Glusta came to Chief Wahanaten, saying that the sign in the stars meant Wishwe would come looking for the white egg. I am not this Wishwe fellow, Nicollet declared. Does Chief Wahanaten expect me to find this white egg? When Tiope did not answer, Sleepy Eyes answered. The great mystery has given you special magic to help find what is lost. It is good you have come. Continue on your journey to the place where the water flows to opposite sides. There, past the Red Pipestone, you will find our great chief Wahanaten. He still knows the old ways, even though the time of the 7 council fires is over. Ask him your questions. At this, Nicollet stopped asking questions, his eyes drawn to the heavens and fixed on the North Star. Chapter 43. I have failed him. Now he will never trust me, Fremont thought as he reached down with a gloved hand to rip a plate-sized piece of buffalo shit from the prairie floor. As he pulled the buffalo chip from the grass beneath it, it split in half, releasing odor from its moist center. Fremont tossed it away, knowing that only the older chips could be dried as fuel. Fremont tried to first clean his gloves off on his pants, then on the new prairie grass, before picking up his sack of dried fecal matter he had collected. In the distance, he could hear chuckling. Perhaps they are all right. I will never become more than a servant. Fremont searched the horizon for the small clump of trees where the men had made camp, but he became temporarily lost in the sea of grass that stretched out like the surface of a lake. Someone whistled sharply. Fremont spun in a circle so quickly that the sack swung around also and clunked him in the side. He waved when he saw the little line of smoke and the distant clump of trees. Walking through waist-high grass, Fremont understood that there were no trees in such a place. Why there were few trees. The summer grass choked the earth like a wet blanket, making even a casual stroll laborious. Once the grasses dried, a spark could light a fire that would have burned any tree that managed to emerge from the grass. The band of Sisseton Indians they found at Pipestone Quarry had already claimed the dry brush from the little oasis of trees they found around the small lake near the quarry, and wanting to create harmony with their fellow pilgrims, Nicollet refused to accept their gifts, choosing to send Fremont on his daily errands instead. If Nicollet is ever to trust me, I'll just tell him the whole truth. With the bag of buffalo chips, Fremont returned to the camp, hoping to restore his place amongst the men. A week earlier, at a lake Nicollet dubbed Chetek, tragedy brought him under the protective wing of the professor. After riding for days across the open prairie before finding the headwaters of the Des Moines River, the beauty of Chetek quickly soured. Laframboise and Renville both raised alarm when a village of Sioux turned out to be totally abandoned. Nicollet fixated on a large island in the middle of the lake, only to return moody and agitated. Wanting to lighten the mood, Fremont went out hunting with the others. While hunting the uppermost tributary of the large lake, Fremont's feet had become stuck in the mud. Although he was only in 3 feet of water, he lost his balance and fell backwards, almost drowning. When he woke, he found himself at Nicollet's fire. "Do you want to be a hunter or a scientist?" Nicollet asked. "Can I be both?" Fremont mused, but Nicollet did not laugh. "I took this commission so I could learn from you. Then focus on the science, and I will teach you how to properly make a map." With Nicollet's ephemeris book, filled with astronomical data, including longitude, latitudes, and charts of astronomical objects, Fremont quickly learned the book was almost more valuable than the yellow telescope that rode in its own wagon. Once he finished studying the book, Nicollet would teach him how to use the sextant and barometer. 2 days ago, however, Fremont lost the book and found himself alienated from both the voyagers and the scientist, which was how he ended up collecting buffalo chips for fuel. Swinging the bag to his other shoulder, Fremont returned to camp with at least 2 days of fuel. The lighter the bag, the better it would burn, and the bag was massive and light. Glancing to the south, Fremont saw the first of a dozen horses just 50 yards from where he stood. Indians! Even at 50 yards, Fremont knew they were not Sioux. The approaching caravan was led by men with shaved heads, with a plume of black hair rising like a spine down their necks. With the horses attached to pole carts, no one in the party rushed out to kill him, but Fremont nevertheless dropped his bag of dried dung, drew his pistol, and stood his ground. "I will be a shield for Nicollet." In the distance, the camp of Sioux stood at attention, but only Fremont had armed himself. He raised the gun above his head and then steadily put it back into its holster. With a gesture, Fremont welcomed the strangers closer, picking up the bag of dung. "Who are they? What do they want? Eugene Flandine gasped beside the guide, Joe Laframbo. They are Missouri, Laframbo explained, without even turning. Although not a large man, the frontier had turned him into a dried piece of leather. They have come a long way north to find this sacred place. Are they going to attack? Fremont checked. Of course not. The Pipestone Quarry is the closest thing the Indians have to a church. Tribes from hundreds of miles in all directions visit this place, knowing that the Great Spirit gave it to them. None of them would dare profane such a place with bloodshed. They come here for peace, not war. We should go talk to them, Nicollet said to Laframbo. He walked over to the food supplies and took a crate of food from the bewildered Big Mo and handed it to Ironwalker. With Renville flanking Nicollet, the three men led the young Sioux prince out to the approaching Missouri Indians. Keep a close eye on the horses tonight, boys, Big Mo muttered with his rotting teeth. These Indians will rob us blind and leave us to die in the prairie if they can. Don't believe any of this hospitality they are about to show. They will sneak up tonight. After a few tense moments of waiting helplessly for Renville and Laframbo to translate their intentions to the Missouri Indians, Fremont joined Nicollet and the others to speak with them. Even though no one could bridge the language gap between the English, French, Sioux, and Missouri languages, a deal was struck after Nicollet finished hugging each of the weary Missouri travelers. After, the Missouri continued to a spot on the far north side of the quarry, where they gathered in a circle. The three families of Sioux watched them closely for an hour before continuing with their own routines. Fremont strolled from wagon to wagon and tent to tent, searching for a purpose. Most of the men ignored him as he stood and stared, but Nicollet called out gently, "Johnny." "Yes, Professor Nicollet?" "I would like to apologize for my harsh words the other day." "I understand." Fremont nodded, still showing guilt for having lost the book. Nicollet continued to pass his metallic utensils through the little flame. "What are you doing, Professor?" "During my negotiations with Secretary of War Poncet about the parameters of this expedition, I was afforded 2 crates of smallpox vaccines to administer as I saw fit. The Missouri Indians have traveled hundreds of miles in order to quarry stone for a new peace pipe to use at their religious services. Tomorrow, I will give them good medicine to help them survive the epidemic killing so many of their people." "I thought Renville said all of the good stone for the pipes had been harvested by the Sioux." "It has," Nicollet shrugged, but he continued cleaning the needles and syringes. "But it seems that the Great Spirit has been hard at work bringing all of us together at this place." "You mean God?" "Yes. Call him what you will. The Missouri said this place is holy, created when the Great Spirit cast his lightning to the ground, revealing the sacred red stone below the surface. Do you remember the terrible storm we encountered when we arrived? How it almost overturned Renville's wagon?" "Yes, but the Sioux women claimed that the buffalo herds wore a path through the prairie, revealing the red stone long ago." Nicollet nodded. "So it is your view that one story must be right and the other story must be wrong. Many of my friends think like you do, Johnny. Life must fit one paradigm or another. But sometimes multiple theories can fit the same evidence. The day you begin to assume is the day your mind closes to possibility. And before you know it, you cannot see the path set before you by the Great Spirit." Fremont stood, baffled by Nicollet's point. "The Missouri, for instance, traveling up through the lands of the Iowa, lost their way, missing the rock rapids that would have led them back to these sacred lands. Instead, they followed Canaranzi Creek far to the east, leading them blindly over the lands we had crossed, where they found this." Nicollet reached down and tossed a thick leather-bound book at Fremont's feet. Recognizing it immediately, Fremont picked up the Ephemeris book, which contained countless charts. I think we know that. Take a moment to consider the odds of this book being found out in the open prairie on the eve of the most important celestial event of the past 6 years, and then tell me you do not believe in the Great Spirit. Dumbfounded, Fremont stood holding the book. Destiny transformed. Professor Nicollet, there's something you need to know about my place on this expedition. Involving Secretary Ponset? Does he already know my true purpose? First, he sent me away from you, and now he wants me to spy on you. He placed me under the command of Colonel Hebert, knowing that I would be placed on your expedition. He wants me to steal the secrets of your new science. I accepted the funding, knowing your loyalties were most likely divided. They are not divided, Professor. I am only your servant from this day forward. I do not want a servant. I only want you to be the man you are meant to be. When Nicollet looked back down, he had already transitioned from a box of vaccines to another, more sinister crate. What are you going to do with that? Nicollet smiled before opening the crate of dynamite. It is the custom of the Missouri for them to prepare themselves by fasting and purification for 3 days. Especially he who must work in the quarry. Okay. The one selected to work in the quarry must abstain from all contact with the opposite sex. They then should proceed to a ceremony of prayers and offerings to the spirit of the quarry. They give him food and smoking materials so that he will let them have good stone that will not flake and is clear, red, compact, and uniform. If by ill fortune the worker chances upon samples of rock from a bed of thin sheets and cannot find any better for making pipes, this man is impure, a liar who has misled the others by vaunting a chastity of which he is not capable. He is obliged to retire. Another takes his place who mines deeper or chooses a better site. Now do you understand? Not really, Professor Nicollet. I have decided that you will be our virgin representative, who will search for this elusive Catlin stone which they use to make pipes. A virgin? You haven't heard the gossip, have you? Wait, is this my penance? No, Nicollet laughed. I am giving you the honor of joining the Missouri on this sacred endeavor. I will not see our Missouri friends, who have returned this precious book on the eve of the occultation of Spica, fail and return home empty-handed. But what are you going to do with the dynamite, Professor Nicollet? Prepare yourself, Johnny, for in 3 days you will be transformed into Thor, the god of thunder and lightning. Chapter 44. That night, while the voyagers danced, sang, and wrestled and laughed around their buffalo chip campfire, Nicollet and the gentlemen gathered at the center wagon around the large telescope. When the clouds scattered, Nicollet quickly went about his business, explaining the details to the botanist Carl Geyer, as well as to his topographic apprentice, young Fremont. For the first time in 6 years, I am prepared to observe and compare the longitude of a place deduced by 3 methods: chronometer, lunar distance, and the eclipse of a star. Captain Gaspard de Belligny, who studied the scientific methods of Nicollet's map making for the French government, patted Fremont on his shoulder while Nicollet searched the heavens for his star. The Great Spirit will indeed smiled on Fremont's blunder. Should I forgive him, though? If I trust him with the truth, will Fremont end up like my dear Shagobay? It was the 4th of July, It was the 4th of July, and it was time for bastard Johnny Freeman to be fully reborn as Lieutenant John C. Fremont. With Big Mo part of Nicollet's seemingly cruel joke, Fremont had been given no food or nourishment in order to prepare himself for his big moment with the dynamite. Even though the dirty voyagers had been allowed to enter the quarry to bore holes, they were still allowed to eat, drink, and be merry. But Fremont spent most of his time under the wagon, his belly groaning and gurgling for lack of food. Joe Laframbo and Ben Doyne even returned with an obscene bounty of food, 2 great Canada geese and 8 ducks, which allowed them to share with both their Missouri and Sioux neighbors, but not for Fremont. After supper, Nicollet called his apprentice over to his laboratory wagon. "Do you know what today is?" "The day I get to eat." "No," Nicollet smiled. "The day I get to light the dynamite." "Oh, the day I get to light the dynamite?" "No." Question mark. Fremont just shook his head. "Today is the birthplace of our country. I came to this country as a penniless traveler, but you were afforded the honor of being born into this country. You've made us proud with your sacrifice, so let us make you a little treat." Nicollet procured a tin cup. "I was saving this for a special event, but it can be our little secret. Something to get you through until tomorrow." Nicollet nodded, unsure of the plan. Then Nicollet wore his wizard's hat. After filling the cup with water, he added sugar and then began to carefully measure out small doses of other powders and chemicals, until finally, with the addition of a little soda and the caramel-colored water, began to fizz and pop, bringing the cup to life. "Drink," Nicollet smiled with assurance. "Will it hurt?" Nicollet laughed. "No, it will not hurt. I have found this little chemical concoction to be quite refreshing and filling, especially for an empty stomach." Fremont's caution turned to surprise once he tested the first sip. He quickly swallowed down a gulp, and then another, before an unexpected belch caught him by surprise. "It is delicious." "Sip it gently," Nicollet said, sending him back to his spot under the wagon. "Later this afternoon, you will once again bring thunder and lightning to the prairie." Independence Day proved to be hot and dull until it was time for the dynamite. With the eyes of the scientists, voyagers, Missouri, and Sioux upon him, Nicollet gave Fremont some last-minute instructions. When it came time to light the fuse, Fremont bolted faster than a jackrabbit back to where the men cowered in safety. "Did you light it?" Laframbo questioned, and for a moment Fremont's eyes grew wide with self-doubt. But then the thunderous explosion shook the quarry, sending the stone shrapnel high into the air, only to come down like a red hailstorm. The reverberations were soon swallowed up by the cheering from the men. Nicollet bolted across the field, waving to the Indian tribes to come quickly. The blasting had produced a fresh vein of red mineral for their pipe, which was easily harvested by the chosen members of each tribe. Afterwards, Nicollet's fiddle filled the air, and 3 nations celebrated Independence Day with music. Just before Big Mo's supper, Fremont appeared on the top of a distant bluff overlooking the quarry. He waved a large American flag, which was greeted by a chorus of "Hurrah!" from the voyagers. But then he did something unexpected. Isolated in a 23-foot pillar of red stone, a chimney of eroded rock stood alone in front of the bank of stone. Carefully judging its distance, young Fremont took a running leap, flag in hand, only to land on the 2-foot sloping platform on top of the chimney. After teetering for a moment, Fremont rose squarely atop Chimney Rock, proudly waving the flag to even louder celebration. "Come," Nicollet said to the others. "The fool won't be able to get a running start to leap off the chimney. He'll need our help." True enough, Fremont's descent was far from glorious. After creating a human chain along the side of the pillar to retrieve him, Nicollet, Renville, Geyer, Laframbo, and Flandine sat with Fremont in the red rubble at the base of Chimney Rock. "We should mark this day," Laframbo said, holding a big bowie knife. "Come." They followed Laframbo to the wall of stone and watched him carve his initials in it. Then he handed the bowie knife to Nicollet. Nicollet paused, remembering how Francois Champollion had once bragged about adding his name to a list of pharaohs, a chance at immortality, or blasphemy. When the 5 men finished, the big Spanish blade was handed to Fremont. "Go ahead," Laframboise told him. "You've earned it." Fremont carved his first name and smiled. The moment quickly ended when they all turned to the sound of a galloping horse. Tiope rode up from the scouting patrol and said, "There is trouble to the west." Chapter 45. The Dakota Prairies is a glacial ridge 200 miles long and at places 100 miles wide. It abruptly rises 900 feet from the prairie, which is why Lewis and Clark described it as the mountain of the prairie. With its highest elevation in the north, near the border of North Dakota, the ridge gradually slopes away to the south toward the Missouri River in northwest Iowa. The Sioux River sits atop the ridge, running the entire length from north to south. Because of its steep slope in places, it is the headwaters of several rivers that flow in all directions. Because of this strange anomaly, the Nicollet expedition of 1838 intended to study the elevation of the Dakota Prairie near Sioux Falls, which was the unofficial border between the eastern Dakota and western tribes of the Yankton, Yanktonai, and Lakota of the open plains. With the startling news delivered by Tiope, everything halted, including the wagon train, and for 3 days, riders scouted ahead while the voyagers nervously cleaned their guns and stared down every blade of grass that moved in the breeze. Baron Lahontan's map showed the Riviera Long flowing from the west of the Mississippi River, making the Minnesota, Des Moines, or the Cannon rivers likely matches. It first notes a separation Descartes, indicating a continental divide of sorts, like what I found at Chetek. It was a divide that Lahontan labeled a waterway riviera, or Riviere Morte, or River of Death. The distinctive headwater for the River of Death began in a pronounced ridge that ran north to south. On the map, Lahontan left a mark indicating the place where he saw the copper vitriol bleeding openly upon the earth. Visit the interior of the earth. By rectification, thou shalt find the hidden stone, the Undine. When Laframboise came galloping back to the camp, everyone, including Nicollet, waited to find out what had happened to the great oasis outpost. Big Mo Maxwell immediately gave the hungry guide a cup of water and a bowl of stew. "It's not the smallpox," Laframboise said before taking in the first bit of nourishment in 2 days. "Dieu merci," Nicollet prayed. Junior Renville sighed in relief. His home was north, near the headwater of the Minnesota, yet on the vast prairie was considered a neighbor to Laframboise, was considered a neighbor to the Laframboise outpost of Great Oasis. "So your wife and son are fine?" Nicollet clarified. Laframboise explained, "Red Fox and Lowell are fine. Tiope was right. The entire post was burned to the ground, but not because of smallpox. Many of the provisions were buried, and the clues left behind indicate that they traveled north." "To Lacaparo," Junior Renville said with a smile. "Yes, it appears both our families wintered safely. But there is other news," Laframboise said as he shoveled down mouthfuls of stew. "I met a Sioux warrior that traveled south from Lacaparo." Now, Iron Walker perked up, hearing news of one of his father's men. Hearing about the smallpox epidemic on the prairie, a roving band of Fox Indians came up out of Iowa looking to take advantage of things. I would bet that is why they burned down all the buildings at Grand Oasis. Tiope muttered the reason, to leave the Fox with nothing but ash. Sioux war parties have gone to Sioux Falls, where they plan to ambush this raiding party. So we will not be able to map the base of the Coteau, Mr. Nicollet. What are the other options? Nicollet asked, knowing all hopes of finding the Undine meant exploring every watershed and Spirit Lake he could find. But he also needed to produce results or risk losing his government funding. The Sioux hunter said that Wanetta of the Yankton had come from Devil's Lake to visit with Renville at Lac qui Parle. Wanetta? Nicollet repeated. Is this the same man as the legendary Wahanotan? It is his son, Tiope said, and then turned to Laframbo. Why would he be so far from his father? Laframbo ran his hand through his thinning black hair. The reason Wanetta has come south from Devil's Lake is that a band of 5 Tzaptanen families have gathered on the northern edge of the Coteau, near a place called Two Woods Lakes. They are unpredictable and dangerous. Nicollet asked, how close would we come to Two Woods? If you are to properly map the Coteau? Laframbo sighed and answered, within 10 miles of their camp. The odds of a single hunter finding our wagon tracks are quite high. How many would there be? Nicollet asked, knowing his decision held his own life and the lives of others in his family in his hands. 5 families? There could be 50 of them. Will they be heavily armed? They would undoubtedly have ill-gotten weapons. These men are outcasts from society, and thus see everyone, including a scientific expedition, as their enemy. So much risk. How far away is Lac qui Parle from here? It is more than 60 miles due north, but that would take us far away from the Dakota Prairies, which is our destination. If we head straight west for 40 miles, we find this great ridge where it becomes more defined the farther north we head. Nicollet took a moment to decide. He looked at young Fremont and then over at the German botanist, Geyer. This is a scientific expedition. We need to measure the Coteau. Don't worry about the savages, Professor Nicollet, James Cluett boasted. They won't come within 100 yards of our wagon train. We'll protect you, Professor Nicollet, Pierre Boucher added, and soon all the voyagers threw in their support. Nicollet felt their confidence, and I can use this as a plausible excuse to remove spies from the expedition. Since we are heading into possible danger, we will send a wagon with Yellow Madison, Ironwalker, and Flandine under the protection of Captain Beligny and the Viscount to Lac qui Parle, where they can tell Mr. Renville of our plans. Then it is settled. We will divide our expedition and adjust our heading, Laframbo declared, nodding approval at Nicollet, and I will find out why Lahontan called it the River of Death. Chapter 46. Day after day, Nicollet filled the blank white pages with ink, but his map did not match the designs of Baron Lahontan, except for an encounter with death. At the base of the Coteau's sharply ascending wall, the expedition found a beautiful lake tucked into the crease of land where they camped. It's so beautiful, Fremont said aloud. The voyagers then decided The voyagers then promptly harassed the young officer about his declaration, until Fremont retreated to Nicollet, who was gathering his data in his book. So, Johnny, when we return from our mapping expedition, is there someone other than this lake that holds your heart? Fremont shook his head. Yes, but I'd stand more of a chance with this lake. Ah, the brave knight falls in love with an aquatic enchantress. What is the name of your Undine? I met her in Washington just before we departed. She's too far young for me. By the time we return, she may be a woman ready to marry, Nicollet offered. Well, there is another problem. Her father, star-crossed lovers. Whose daughter is she? She's the daughter of Senator Benton of Missouri. Ooh la la. Do you know him? I do. Before Colonel Hebert offered funding, I tried many times to acquire funding from him. He is a formidable man I inadvertently called a vampire. As I said, I stand more of a chance with this lake. We shall call her name Benton, and then in honor of the daughter, not the father. You do that? Thank you, Mr. Nicollet. It wasn't the only lake to receive a symbolic name. After Nicollet made measurements of longitude, latitude, and barometric pressures to determine elevation, the smaller caravan again rolled up the spine of the Great Ridge, where Laframboise showed them the Big Sioux River, which flowed across the top of the ridge. I already said that. As well as the massive lakes that formed along the top of the Continental Divide. Hoping for information from the local Yankton Sioux about the Tzaptonans to the north, Laframboise camped between a narrow isthmus of 4 lakes. This lake is as large and beautiful as the lakes in the land of the Chippewa, Nicollet said. What is the lake called? Geyer asked Laframboise. The lake is called Unksey, Laframboise answered. Really, what does it mean? Oh, it means much cactus in the Sioux tongue. Cactus, the German botanist grew excited. I shall have to find this Unksey and study it. How do you spell that? Geyer asked, jotting it down. U-N-K-C-E. Laframboise spelled it out slowly. Nicollet noticed how Junior Renville started to laugh. What? Geyer asked. We are staying at Lake Unksey, Laframboise said confidently. Put that down in your notebook. Don't, Mr. Geyer. Renville finally stopped him, throwing a small rock at Laframboise, who burst out laughing. I'm sorry, Mr. Geyer. I was just having fun with you, the crusty old guide said. The Sioux call this place Unkseyota, which means prickly pear. It is a type of thistle that can poke through a moccasin. Unksey by itself means shit. Lake shit? Geyer repeated, and all the men laughed. That's right, lake full of shit, Laframboise repeated his joke. Nicollet reached down for his notebook and began to jot things down. A few days earlier, while Nicollet studied a boulder deposited on the top of a hill, Fremont and Laframboise had openly debated the great flood of Genesis, with Fremont turning to the science taught by his former mentor Joel Poncet. Neither man acquiesced during the debate. Nicollet had remained silent, knowing that as Secretary of War, Poncet held the purse strings for the expedition. Yet he also knew what DeSmet had told him. Poncet planned to remove all Indians and erect a series of forts across the prairie. Now, Nicollet took the opportunity to mend hurt feelings. I have decided what this lake shall be called on my map. Far in the north, I named the Chippewa Lakes after many of my friends, such as Tolliver, Sibley, Gratiot, and even my old nemesis Arago. So a lake whose name varies from being prickly to being full of shit shall forever be known as Lake Poncet. Laframboise laughed and laughed at the joke crafted just for him. Big Mo stood from his fire and looked to the setting sun, scratching his hair under his cap. That doesn't look good. Nicollet looked to the west, and that Benjamin Doyen carried Jim Tyope under his arm. Chapter 47. Our expedition travels upon the edge of a knife. Nicollet opened his green chest when the others weren't looking and discreetly removed the light object in the cloth bag and tossed it into the fire. For a moment, it just sat there in the coal and ash, and Nicollet quickly looked over to Big Mo, hoping he would not have to explain it. Then the cloth bag blazed up, and the human hair inside of it ignited, bringing a strange warmth with it. By the time Mo returned, only the dried scalp of Ohanzi burned, appearing as a darkened piece of coal. Laframbo tucked 2 rifles into his saddlebag and also armed himself with 2 pistols, giving him more than a dozen shots. Junior Renville was similarly armed, although he carried something Laframbo did not, an American flag. "If we don't return by lunch, pray for us," Laframbo said, and then galloped off to the east. Once the scalp of Ohanzi had vanished from the earth, Nicollet walked back over to the wagon where fierce Jim Tyope shivered like a child under the shell of a blanket. The other men remaining in the camp were silent, but held their tongues. "I have put us all in danger, but Tyope once saved my life, and now I must save his." 2 days earlier, Ben Doyne had carried the limp body of Tyope back to camp, after he found him in a shallow inlet of Lake Poncet, where he'd been duck hunting. The fever that still gripped him had been immediately noticeable when Tyope was set beside the campfire at the lake, but neither Doyne nor anybody else knew if Tyope had lost consciousness prior to falling in the water, or if the fall in the water had caused the fever. When his waterlogged lungs coughed up blood, Laframbo offered a solution: to quickly turn back to the east for the home of Joseph Renville at Lac Aparle, where Tyope could receive medical treatment. Would I have done the same for any other man? Nicollet wondered as the morning slowly dragged on. The path to Lac Aparle came at a steep cost. The expedition had to pass by 2 lakes, where the 5 families of renegade Hizeptonans camped. Laframbo, who had Ottawa blood, and Junior Renville, who was part Sioux, immediately volunteered to ride ahead to declare their peaceful intentions. Fremont sat cleaning his gun when the sound of horses returned from over the hill. Laframbo and Renville had survived. "I just counted 50 teepees along the lake," Junior explained with a voice crackling with fear. "Are these the same men who killed Louis LeBlanc last spring?" Clouet asked. "They are, but luckily they also knew and respected Junior's father, so we are strangely fortunate. We explained that we were scientists, not the military, and we're just not searching for any fugitives from justice. The chiefs appreciated our effort not to disturb the women and children on our way to Lac Aparle, and the meeting was almost concluded until they learned Joseph Nicollet was with the expedition." "Me?" Nicollet said, almost flinching. "How do these men know me?" "I'm sorry, Professor Nicollet. Chief Thunderface wants to meet the one they call the Great Sorcerer. He insisted we bring you to the village so they might dance and smoke with you. It was the only way they'd let us pass." Chapter 48. 2 lakes, despite what the name implied, turned out to be a cluster of 4 small lakes. From the hill where the wagons stopped, Nicollet could see the descending slope of the Coteau, which led toward the Minnesota River and Lac Aparle. Part of him wanted to just keep riding, but it appeared he had no other choice than to meet with the renegade chief. At the bottom of the hill, nearly 100 men on horseback waited for the arrival of the Great Sorcerer. "These men are religious zealots," Renville reminded Nicollet as they rolled down the hill in a single wagon. "They are stubborn and superstitious, and if you offend their ways, they will not hesitate to kill every last one of us." "I understand," Nicollet affirmed once again, setting the wampum belt on his shoulder. "I have already met one far away at the Crow Wing River." The tension hanging in the air ended just as Nicollet arrived at the camp. But then Nicollet rushed forward and embraced their fierce chief, much to the chuckles of the tense family members. The bewildered chief looked around, took a deep sniff, and declared to his friends and family, "He smells like flowers." At the command of Chief Thunderface, the women and children began to sing, the riders began to circle and scream, and the elders of the village stood to welcome Nicollet to their fires. Laframbo stayed on his left, and Renville stayed on his right, and the three of them left their wagon in order to sit at the fires. As Nicollet offered up the last of their sugar and gifts as coffee as gifts, Thunderface shouted out, "Dance! Dance! I say the name! Dance for the great sorcerer!" While they danced feverishly for Nicollet, all three men were stuffed with food, which Nicollet finished to the last morsel. Once the meal was done, Nicollet stood up and went over to Big Mo's food supplies, picking the last of the wrapped cornbread loaves, which he broke off in pieces and began to distribute to all the women and children, whom he patted on the head like a doting grandfather. Once done, Nicollet sat back down next to Laframbo, whose mouth was agape. "See?" Chief Thunderface shouted loudly after the dance concluded. "He, by himself, looks after everyone. Never have we seen a white as good." What Renville couldn't translate, Nicollet explained through sketches and illustrations. On and on into the night, the poor renegade tribe stuffed their guests with dog meat and bread root, while they pressed Nicollet for information about himself and his purpose for coming to the prairie. "You have spirit," one of Thunderface's brothers declared to Nicollet. "You are not proud. You treat us as equals, while the others have us eat beside the poor, who they scorn." Nicollet knew they were prodding him for more gifts, which seemed to upset Laframbo. But Nicollet had no problem raiding Big Mo's food stock for pork, cereal, and grain if it meant saving the life of Tiope. "See if I speak the truth," Thunderface finally declared between dances. "Will you all believe me now? Didn't I know better than any of you? I guaranteed he would come, that you would not wait for nothing. See now all that he does for you? Dance then to please the great man that has come from far, far away to be charitable to you, to your women, and to your children. This man will return to the American president and let all of them know the truth about us. And when he does, this period of great despair will be washed away, and a new day will come to our people." "They think I am some sort of savior," Nicollet realized. "What will happen if they learn I am only a man?" Thunderface reached into a leather bag and procured a turtle rattle. Holding it in his hands, he said, "Kia is the guardian of life, longevity, and fortitude. When I was born, my mother took a piece of my birth cord and placed it inside of this rattle. She taught me the meaning of time with the shell of this turtle. The 13 scales on the back represent the 13 moons of a year. 28 smaller scales along the edge represent the 28 days from one moon to the next." Nicollet realized he was running out of time and wondered what the watchmaker's son would think of the great sorcerer out on the frontier. He had not found Lady Drummond's murderer, the alchemist's map, the philosopher's stone, the key of death, the Undine, or even Fort La Houlier. Yet when Chief Thunderface reached over and handed him the turtle rattle, Nicollet felt blessed and content. Gorged and exhausted, he slept better than he did at any other time on the expedition. Then he dreamt of the Undine. The water spirit found him in an old memory of the Chamonix glacier near his home of Savoy. In his memory, the Undine again appeared in a wall of ice. She moved gracefully within the blue waters, approaching the surface of the ice as if looking through the glass pane of an aquarium. "Do you remember how you were trapped in the glacier for days?" she asked. "It was a warning, a premonition. Now you surround yourself with savages and believe them to be your friends. These thieves will kill you and your friends for the sheer pleasure of it." "No," Nicollet said as the shimmering image on the other side of the ice. These Tizaptonans are humanity in their purest form. They are murderers and rapists. They hold the secret to the past. They are the last link between uncovering the truth about you. Me? I might not be the great sorcerer, or Wishwe, or the great Thunderbird, but I know you are not an Undine, or a sleeping bear known as No Soul. I will learn your secrets before I am through. Is that a threat, child? The Undine asked, pressing her face to the pane of glass. At that, the ice collapsed, swallowing Nicollet in a wave of blue vitriol. Mr. Nicollet, wake up. Nicollet's eyes opened wide, and he immediately sat up on his elbows, but Frambo cupped his mouth. Thunderface will keep us here for a week. We are already perilously low on supplies. We are going to slip away quietly and depart before any of them know better. Understood? Understand? Clutching the turtle rattle, Nicollet nodded, feeling as if the Undine herself had caused Lafranbo to pull him away from his Tizaptonan village. At noon, 3 of Thunderface's warriors appeared on horseback on the high bluff of the Coteau, but by the time they returned to Two Lakes, the wagons added another 12 miles after once again reaching the flat prairie. Nicollet sat in the wagon bed for the next 2 days, sulking and pondering the dream of the Undine. Finally, Nicollet returned to the wagon seat beside Laframbo, who glanced at him curiously, as if seeing him for the first time. "What are you doing out here?" "I'm making a map of the Mississippi watershed," Nicollet said, a little perplexed. "Why? Why is a fancy man like you pursuing such a foolish endeavor?" "I would disagree that this is foolish. Back in France, the world is shackled like some caged beast, to be prodded and poked by my colleagues. Out here, it is still wild and free. I see it as a privilege to be out here with you." "Perhaps Poncet isn't the only one full of shit," Frambo muttered. "Your map will lead greedy men right to Thunderface's village, and right to the sacred pipestone, quarry. It will allow them to shackle this great beast like the horses that pull our wagons. They will ride the beast into the ground and never think twice about the savages. Do not trust your friends in Washington, Mr. Nicollet. They will trod right over you with their dreams of wealth and power." With his mind spoken, Laframbo seemed to breathe easier, but Nicollet knew he was right. My map will doom these people, but how else do I investigate? As they finally neared Lac Aparle and the Minnesota River that would lead all the way back to Fort Snelling, a single rider appeared on the hill. Chapter 49. Lac Aparle is a naturally occurring 10-mile reservoir along the upper Minnesota River system. The exact meaning of the French phrase is still debated. The peculiar translation reads, "the lake that speaks," but why it became known by the name is uncertain. One suggestion is the alluvial bluffs that created the dam, also responsible for the echoes, which both Indians and French voyagers noted. Another tradition says it received its name because of the strange groaning and whistling of the ice, which, because of river fluctuations, constantly shifts during the winter. A Sioux tradition claims that the first visitors to the lake heard voices call out to them, but not a single footprint or source for the sound could be located. Lac Aparle's first permanent resident came when Canadian soldier, interpreter, translator, guide, trader, and evangelist Joseph Renville built a stockade for the village, replete with a trade house and church. Renville, who was a quarter Indian, married a Sioux woman and fathered 8 children, including his eldest, Joseph Renville Jr. The Renville house was known throughout the region for its massive stone fireplace, where the eclectic pioneer entertained guests of all nationalities. When the Nicollet expedition arrived on Sunday, July 15th, 1838, they were greeted by the other half of their expedition, a host of worshippers, both white and Indian, and the residents of Grand Oasis, including the family of Joe Laframbo. For once, Nicollet was not intimidated by the physical presence of a stranger, for Joseph Renville was a small man with an almost delicate constitution. He had a thick head of gray, bristly hair, and wore clothes that were clean and crisp. After only a few hours in the presence of the man, Nicollet determined his intelligence could rival any of the scientists he knew in Paris. Joining the savant of the prairie were several guests, and for 4 days Nicollet exchanged stories with Renville while Jim Tyope recovered under the care of Mrs. Renville. On the 4th day of storytelling, Nicollet let slip that he desired to meet the legendary chief of the Yankton. Wahanotan? Renville repeated, his mouth agape as he looked at the equally stunned guests. You came seeking Wahanotan. I have failed to find either the Philosopher's Stone or the location of the mine. Wahanotan might be my last chance to unlock the truth. On several stops of my journey, I've heard the name Wahanotan. From what I've been told, his people still live wild and free out upon the prairie. Yes, the Yanktons still cling to the old ways, despite our efforts to evangelize them and prepare them for the days of the modern world, Renville said. But our baffled looks stem from the fact that Chief Wahanotan's son, Wanetta, or he who charges, came here a little more than a month ago. Of course. Why is this baffling? If you ever met Wanetta, you would understand better. He is a mysterious fellow whose glare could soften the spine of any man. He just rode up to our village and camped under a maple for 3 weeks. We pressed him about his business, and he said he'd received a vision and waited for a man from his dreams. It can't be me. I can't truly be the Wishwe. Renville continued with a shrug. He waited under that maple tree for 3 weeks before leaving, just a few days before your arrival. How do you understand our reaction? That is quite a coincidence. Where did Wanetta go when he departed? Looking for you, or looking for his father. Chief Wahanotan could be anywhere out on the open prairie, but he always camps at Mini Wakan, Spirit Lake. Perhaps Mille Lacs is not the only sacred place. How far is Mini Wakan from here? Too far for you to safely reach and return prior to winter. It is also too dangerous without a stronger escort. You were right when you characterized the Yankton as untamed. The young boys would strip the wheels from your wagon just to show their stealthy hunting skills during the 200-mile trip. If I cannot find the Philosopher's Stone, then perhaps I can find Wanetta still lingering nearby. If only I had more time. With Tyope recovering, Nicollet used his scientific purpose as an excuse to seek out clues from Baron Lahotten's map. With 2 others, Nicollet traveled by canoe up the final stretch of the St. Peter River, traveling through Marsh Lake and Big Stone Lake before reaching the headwaters of both the St. Peter River and the Red River, which flowed to the north. Yet there is no blue earth. At the southernmost tip of the Coteau, which is it? Is it Coteau? At the northernmost tip of the Coteau, The trio explored every creek and stream that fed the waterway that led all the way back to Fort Snelling. Nicollet collected the elevation of the Coteau as well as the elevation of the headwaters. Yet there is no Turtle Island or Spirit Lake. At a Yankton village along the banks of Lake Traverse, Nicollet learned Juanetta had been in the area a few days earlier. Yet no tales of Wishwe or water spirits. Nicollet did find a strange hollow reported to be haunted, but after a few hours he departed once again with a hollow feeling in his gut. After 8 days, he knew that the St. Peter River was not Lahontan's Long River, any more than the upper Mississippi proved to be. He also knew he needed to return. So on July 28th, Nicollet watched as Lacaparo village came into sight once again. And 3 figures waited to greet them. Nicollet recognized the first figure as Joseph Renville because of his short stature. The man to his right also became obvious when he saw the distinctive flop hat that covered the scarred scalp of Jim Tiope. When the canoe landed on the shore, Nicollet was able to clearly see the details of the third man. Juanetta? The large Yankton stood 6 foot 3 inches with rich leggings that exaggerated his height. Upon his broad chest he wore an embroidered tunic befitting the rank as a son of a chief. He wore a buffalo skin coat around his broad shoulders, and his hair was decorated with feathers. Instead of seeing eyes, Nicollet saw a pair of green glasses upon the man's chiseled face. Could God have crafted a finer human being? In long strides, the warrior approached the canoe and outstretched his hand to help Nicollet from the canoe. Lila epeyate kin washte, Juanetta said, and Nicollet quickly turned to Tiope. Juanetta says, "Today is a good day." Lila epeyate kin washte, Nicollet repeated, a bit more uncertain about how it would end. Mirthly Castle came into existence as a hunting lodge for King David of Scotland, and in the 14th century, a castle became the centerpiece of the estate. Built along the edge of legendary Burnham Woods, its reputation as a royal playground extended into the 19th century, when Sir John Archibald Drummond Stewart attempted to reinvest in the property with a new castle designed by James Gillespie Graham. Following the death of the 6th Baronet in 1838, Sir John Archibald Drummond Stewart, his younger brother Billy, returned to Scotland to assume responsibility. Okay, I'm going to to assume responsibility of the estate and lordship. Why does the lord of the castle need to lie? Antoine Clement wondered as he sweated through the layers of his valet uniform. He threw his silk top hat onto the lawn and stripped off his jacket and vest. How did Nicollet survive such clothes? Clement found a large oak and sat under the shade of its limbs, a cree under a tree. Back at the castle, Lord Stewart met with other Scottish lords to sell part of the family estate, another castle called Longueuilmont. Stewart tried to explain its connection to Nicollet's quest, but Clement could not grasp it. What happened to Captain Billy? Did Lord Stewart slowly smother him to death? When the gentlemen finally left in their carriages, other household servants tended to their needs, But Lord Stewart glanced once at the solitary oak, but even after the guests left, he did not rush over. Instead, he walked over to another area of the grand estate where 100 flags marked another connection to Nicollet. It won't be as grand as the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, Stewart had promised when explaining it a month earlier, but it will be a tribute to my newfound faith as well as my friend. The chapel of St. Anthony the Eremite would be a tribute to an Egyptian hermit, with more references to Nicollet and the quest. I've given him a decade of my life. Where will be my tributes? Finally, Stewart left the stakes and walked directly to the oak tree where Clement fumed. It's all settled. My uncle's estate of Longueuil is sold, and once again I am a wealthy man. Does that mean we will go back to the frontier? Clement asked. Eventually, Stewart said, leaning his arm against the tree. Nicollet's methodical scientific strategies will cause him to study every headwater west of the Mississippi before he reaches any conclusions, allowing us time to explore another headwater. Another headwater? Where are we going? This tale does not end with the discovery of Fort LaHillier or the Philosopher's Stone, Stewart said. We are going to Beneas Falls, along with a few other stops. Beneas Falls? What is it? Once, it was believed to be the gateway of the underworld. It is the headwaters of the Jordan River. You and I are going to take a trip to the Middle East before we resume our part in Nicollet's adventure. Chapter 51. Am I Wounded Man or James St. Clair? Sergeant Tyope reached under his hat to itch the place where scar met hair. A carefully crafted lie had given them 5 days to discover what the stars wanted. At the end of the 5 days, Nicollet would be dead, or a great secret would be revealed. The 4 of them stood on the edge of the haunted valley. 2 weeks earlier, Tyope listened as Wanetta gave him clear orders from his father, Chief Wahanaten. Bring Nicollet to the haunted valley, and the will of the Great Spirit will be revealed. Wanetta also spoke to Nicollet about Makato, but said nothing about the terrible legends about the place. Wounded Man owed his life to the mercy of Chief Wahanaten of the Yankton, and as a result, he obeyed the order, even if it meant the death of his dear friend. The entire expedition departed Lac qui Parle and traveled down the Minnesota River for the next 8 days until they reached the camp of Sleepy Eyes at the mouth of the Cottonwood. It was there that Nicollet crafted his lie, claiming to Fremont and others that he intended to vacation with Sleepy Eyes for another 5 days, but would then reunite with the others at the Traverse des Sioux before ending the expedition at Fort Snelling. Believing the lie, everyone but Joe Laframbo went ahead, with Fremont mapping the last segment on his own. The following day, Nicollet, Laframbo, Carl Geyer, and Tyope immediately left Sleepy Eyes home and headed for the haunted valley. 2 days ride to the south. Does Nicollet understand the dangers we face tomorrow? Tyope now wondered. How much should I tell him? The haunted valley was located more than 100 miles downstream from the comforts of Renville's home at Lac qui Parle, and a day's ride south of the Great Bend in the Minnesota River. As a boy, Tyope knew a punishment worse than beatings or floggings waited in the deep valley. Yet now he stood on the edge of a fate worse than death. I must be brave for my people. I must be loyal to the wishes of my chief. If it is the will of the Great Spirit that I die with Mr. Nicollet, so be it. Superstition and fear gnawed at him, and Tyope cradled his rifle in his hands and looked down at the confluence of the Watonwan and Mankato rivers. An Unctehi lives in these waters. waiting to kill the unsuspecting traveler. How can I protect Nicollet from a faceless evil? But loyalty and 2 life debts gave him little choice in the matter. Tiope, are you hungry? Laframbo asked from a little campfire. This buffalo meat will go bad if we don't eat the rest today. I'm not hungry. How can I eat near this place? Tiope asked bitterly. Geyer grinned at Nicollet, who restrained himself from visibly mocking him. Are you frightened, Tiope? Laframbo teased. You only mock me because the Unctehi that lives here provokes you, so I'll forget anything you say. What is an Unctehi? Nicollet asked. An Unctehi is an evil water spirit, like the Manitou? Yes, many believe it is a water spirit, but it is more than that. Evil dwells near it, which is why Laframbo taunted me. The closer we get, the darker our thoughts will become. We near the domain of No Soul. From the story of Wishwe and the White Egg? Tiope nodded. You wish to visit the old soldier fort at Mankato. But across the river lies the haunted valley. If evil does not wait in the shadows, then evil in our hearts might rise up. Nicollet showed no fear. I trust Carl as a brother, and Laframbo is as noble as a knight of the Round Table. I would have them with me, if they are willing. Tell me, Jim, why does this place concern you? I've heard stories about this place since I was a child. Evil dwells in this valley, waiting to claim another victim. Laframbo, certainly you have heard the tale of the murderous rampage of John Moredock. This valley causes all, white or Indian, to turn to evil. What about the story of No Soul? Nicollet pressed, as if he already knew the tale and simply wanted Tiope to repeat it back again. Back at Fort Atkinson, Tiope repeatedly heard tales of the Makato from more than just the tribes of the Sioux. Winnebago, Chippewa, Sauk, and Fox, and even Potawatomi told tales of the place where none of them dared hunt because of the ghosts that lived there. His whole life he had avoided this place, and now the nightmares had come true. And now the nightmares found him. Perhaps my heart will calm if I say the story aloud. There once was a Sioux warrior whose name was Wishwe. Wishwe, Nicollet immediately interrupted. I thought that this story is a fable, and I do not know if it is a tale of the past or of a prophecy of what is to come. Do you still want me to hear it? Do you still want to hear it? Nicollet nodded. So Tiope continued. Wishwe grew up at the most beautiful place on earth, with a calm pool that fed many waters, and whose trees were the oldest and most beautiful on earth. But Wishwe's heart grew restless after he visited the haunted valley, and he cursed his father's ways and left his village to explore the lands of the earth in order to understand the great mystery. Sounds like our friend Ponset, Laframbo muttered, but a harsh look from Nicollet shut him up for Tiope to continue. This young warrior traveled the world, becoming very wise but also very dark. Finally, he traveled to a land far to the north, where the world was old and covered totally in rock and stone. There, Old Man waited, anticipating Wishwe's arrival in his dreams. You see, in the land of stone, where no other life exists, dreams of the past and future echo loudly in the void. So the old man, who knew the terrible mistake young Wishwe was about to make, tried to stop the future from happening. Stop, young man. The way you seek is filled with darkness. It has already claimed my soul and the souls of my daughters, and so too will it claim yours if you continue on this path. Undeterred, Wishwe followed the North Star until he came to a cave where the monster slept. When Wishwe finally found No Soul, it took the form of a great bear. A bear? Nicollet again interrupted the story. Are you sure the legend spoke of a great bear far to the north? Laframbo smirked and shook his head in resignation. Even Geyer seemed dismayed by this little detail, sighing deeply before looking up at the leaves above them. Yes, Professor, but no soul could take many forms. He just took the form of a bear to frighten young Wishwe, but Wishwe was not afraid, because in his travels his soul had become quite black and no longer had room for fear. He wrestled the great bear, trying to kill it. Fool, said the great bear said, you cannot kill me. I am death itself. But a great thunderbird then appeared, swooping down to save Wishwe from certain death, and leaving behind a white egg. Taking the white egg, Wishwe returned to the cave where No Soul slept, and once inside, Wishwe smote No Soul, killing him and freeing the souls kept by the monster. Nicollet turned, attempting to get to his feet, but instead just scrambled away from their circle on all fours, where he threw up his supper of buffalo meat. Carl Geyer stood up and walked over to his mentor, rubbing the man's back gently. It will be okay, Professor Nicollet. It will be okay. Laframbo seemed ready to curse, his jaw locked and twisted. Speaking the tale did not help my fears, Tiope realized, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand on edge, even during a summer day. What's wrong, Professor? Tiope called out to his dearest friend. I apologize, Jim. It has been a very long journey for me. Do you think my concerns are foolish? No, I agree with you. But your story of Wishwe confused me. The wandering shaman I met was looking for Wishwe because he believed he was a hero who could fight the great bear. Stories change in the telling. Nicollet stood to walk back to the small campfire when he turned. Laframbo grabbed his rifle. Tiope heard it also, galloping horses. Luckily, the only two figures appeared from the west, yet seemed to know exactly where they would be camped. One of the figures Tiope immediately recognized, a companion from the last 2 months. The other was a man resurrected, Sleepy Eyes and Ironwalker. Fully healed, Chief Sleepy Eyes rode right up to the camp, and slid off his horse to drop right between the 4 men. Even though Tiope and Laframbo were armed, the sheer size of Sleepy Eyes, now healed from his knife wound, made Tiope's confidence quiver. My friend, I am glad to see you again, Sleepy Eyes began as he loomed over Nicollet, but then he knelt down on the ground, almost cowering until he was lower than the scientist. You have left me sad. I asked myself if I was a squaw, I whom the fear of death, wars, and pain has never stopped. Sleepy Eyes looked up and out over the lush green valley. Will he kill us for entering the haunted valley? You are going to risk dangers, Sleepy Eye declared. I am not leaving you. Chapter 52. Carl Geyer sat alone, angry that Nicollet would not confide his secrets. The great scientific expedition on the prairie had abruptly turned into a secret mission akin to robbing the tomb of an ancient pharaoh. Sleepy Eyes, Tiope, and Nicollet whispered, pointed, and drew in the dirt, while Joe Laframbo watched the shadows for enemies. Carl Geyer's only companion was his notebook. Tuesday, August 14th, 1838. We left our encampment at 7:30 a.m. and crossed the Watonwan branch of the Makato River with some difficulty. At the spot where we crossed, the Watonwan is nearly 60 feet, with a depth of 3 feet. Its waters are clear and navigation by canoe sure. The meaning of the river is strange, signifying something akin to he who watches everything. The main river means Blue Earth River. Here, the river is very interesting. We found stratified banks, 20 to 80 feet high, of sandstone and limestone, filled up with shrubbery. The scenery is beautiful. The river is interrupted often by rocks and rapids. I was unable to ascertain the variety of timber on either side of the river on account of the high water. It is said that the black walnut and butternut is abundant. Red cedar and oaks dress these rocks. We camp at noon, stopping at a large sandbar island, which is below a field of rapids almost a half-mile in length. Nicollet stood on the sandy shore of the Blue Earth River, looking out at the field of boulders. After carefully preparing some sort of talisman, Sleepy Eyes finally rose from his seat at Laframbo's lunch camp and walked over to where Nicollet stood, looking across the Thousand Fingers of river. Nicollet did not want Fremont and the others to come to this place, but why? Although Geyer couldn't hear what was said over the light roar of the water, Nicollet patted the massive Indian on the shoulder. Geyer jumped to his feet when Sleepy Eyes gingerly stepped into the current. "What is he doing?" Geyer shouted over to Nicollet. "He's making an offering to the evil spirits," Nicollet said as the chief's long legs sank deep into the current. Unlike further upstream, where the Blue Earth had cut through 50 to 100 feet of bedrock, the banks were only 30 feet high, but filled with rocks of various sizes, making Sleepy Eye's trek across the channel even more precarious. Tiope, Ironwalker, and Laframbo joined Geyer at the water's edge in case Sleepy Eye was swept away and into the swirling pool at the base of the rapids. But the tall Sioux kept his footing and soon began to climb out of the swiftly flowing water. On the other side of the river's deepest current, the Blue Earth River flowed around two massive boulders in its middle. A mile away, the boulders had been visible despite the drop in elevation, and now the 7-foot giant seemed dwarfed by both boulders. Standing in knee-deep water at the base of the 20-foot boulders, Sleepy Eyes could find no handhold on the smooth stone, so he skirted around the base of the boulder until he reached the backside, where smaller stones allowed him to climb it like a ladder. Hauling his long, lean torso onto the smaller companion stone, Sleepy Eyes spread his arms and, with a thrust from his legs, launched himself up and onto the rounded boulder. As Sleepy Eyes stood, Laframbo began to clap, and soon all 5 men applauded the efforts of their champion. But then he placed the talisman on top of the stone and began to sing a Sioux prayer. "What is he saying?" Geyer asked Laframbo, who watched with squinted eyes. "He prays to the Great Spirit to watch over all of us as we enter the Valley of Death. He mentions each of us by name with a special prayer that we may pass through this place unharmed and join our companions again at the Traverse des Sioux." When the prayers ended, Sleepy Eyes walked to the current again, where Laframbo and Nicollet waited with extended hands to snatch him from the current. A mile from the big glacier boulders, the men stopped at a place to cross the Blue Earth River, allowing Geyer a moment to once again make an entry in his journal. While Nicollet's interests always took precedent, Geyer had maintained a careful journal, marking the place and time he collected his botanical specimens. With the wagon full of fauna and geology, his journal would allow him to publish and lecture for a decade, first in the East and then back home in Germany. At 3 o'clock, we reached the confluence of the Blue Earth River and an eastern tributary. The two banks remain 40 to 50 feet high, but across the confluence, the bank is an additional 60 feet, making a cliff 100 to 120 feet high. Our 2 guides indicate that the large bluff is the place where the Blue Earth is found. Chapter 53. Nicollet looked up at the tall bluff from the base of the river and understood how men from the Le Sueur expedition could see a mountain. His heart steadied from the crossing of the river, and he prepared himself for the arduous hike up the bluff. 8 years after looking at the alchemist's map, he remained 100 feet from an answer. Is the giant crying? Sleepy Eyes crouched down on the shore, with Ironwalker standing beside his father. Both Tiope and Laframbo looked away, giving the mighty chief a moment of privacy. Perhaps this place is indeed haunted. Our greatest warrior is crumbling before my eyes. Having heard the Sisseton chief's confession, Nicollet knew one thing he would find at the top of the hill, however gruesome. Carl Geyer remains neutral. I will bring him with me. Are you ready, Carl? As always, Professor Nicollet, Geyer said with enthusiasm. Back in St. Louis, Nicollet crossed paths with Geyer by chance. With no allegiance to the government, Freemasonry, the Order of Eos, the Periphery, the Jesuits, or the Catholic Church, the young botanist lingered in St. Louis, hoping to join an expedition going anywhere. An impartial witness. The Sewer's fabled mountain did not stretch for 7 miles, and in just 5 minutes, Nicollet and Geyer found the slope on the southern side far easier to scale than the steep western face where they had crossed. Even here, Nicollet had to grab roots, rocks, and branches for handholds as he ascended the bluff. What am I looking for? Geyer said a few feet behind. Oxidized copper residue, Nicollet said. Mikado, as Winetta called it. Blue earth. In a sandstone bluff. There must be some reason for its namesake, Nicollet said, hoping not to be disappointed once again. There must be some magic left in the world. Once Nicollet reached the pinnacle of his climb, he did find something unexpected. As soon as he stepped out of the way, Geyer echoed his thoughts. What in the world is this? Geyer exclaimed. Curious, isn't it? Nicollet admitted, taking a few steps forward. Despite having dense vegetation along the slope of the bluff, the top of it was bald, covered only by a layer of waist-high grass. The teardrop-shaped area stretched 300 feet from nose to tail and 100 feet wide. The little sliver of elevated prairie had a harmonious feeling, with small butterflies flitting from wildfire to wildfire. Atop the bluff, Nicollet also had a better view of the valley. To the west, from where they'd come, he could see the distant valley wall where the Watonwan River met the Mikado. To the south and east, he could see the course of the converging river where it met at the steep footing at the base of the bluff. To the north, he could see another valley wall where the flow of all 3 rivers led to the Minnesota. The area resembled a green bowl nearly 4 miles in diameter. Carl Geyer began to explore the grass, more interested in the flowers than finding any copper vitriol. Nicollet stood with his hands on his hips, finally understanding why previous explorers had declared Fort La Houlier a fraudulent legend. Joseph! Carl Geyer called out, suddenly waving his hands. Nicollet jogged over and stopped in his tracks where he looked down at a collection of skeletons with pieces of flesh and clothing still clinging to their bones. Where are their heads? Veritas caput, Nicollet muttered. Tasca, the truth about the head. From the edge of the bluff, Sleepy Eyes plowed through the grass toward them, followed by Ironwalker, Tiope, and Laframbo. Soon, all stood around the corpses. These men were Tizaptanon, Sleepy Eyes explained. We killed them for desecrating a sacred place. Of course. This is how Sleepy Eyes received his wound. This is how he collected the scalp of Ohanzi, the man who almost killed me. Why were they here? To hide. Only foreigners would willingly enter the haunted valley, or fugitives from the law. The only reason we knew they were here was the smoke from their fire. What do you mean when you saw smoke from their fire? From time to time, the vile Tizaptanans return here and burn everything in sight, keeping the hilltop free of trees. My hunters from Swan Lake saw the smoke and alerted me, which is why I came here 2 summers ago. According to the legend, the Houlier was burned by Fox Indians. What if they were the Tizaptanans? A wooden stockade with a wooden building? Nothing would remain after 140 years, especially if these wild zealots kept burning it. Juanetta said this place was Makato, the place of the Blue Earth, yet I don't see any sign of Blue Earth. The earth stopped bleeding long ago, Sleepy Eyes said with his head hung low. For a long time, our warriors continued coming here to harvest this blue paint for our ceremonies. But now the supply is gone. Is the blue earth found elsewhere? No, this is a sacred spot. This is the heart of the haunted valley, Sleepy Eyes explained, and then glanced at the top of the bluff, leading the men on. The most recent explorers visited a spot near the mouth of the Mikado River. As they all studied the bald bluff, Sleepy Eyes knelt in the grass. The powerful war chief soon began to weep, drawing everyone to his side. We took their heads for profaning this place, leaving them on the edges of the valley as a warning to travelers. I can only pray that the Great Spirit will forgive the barbarity of my actions. Perhaps we could give them a proper Christian burial, Nicollet offered, his hand upon Sleepy Eye's strong back. Sleepy Eye consented, but not here, lest they be tormented by the spirit of No Soul. Tiope was not pleased. Professor Nicollet, we only have a few hours of daylight left. We cannot stay in such a place tonight. There is time, Nicollet said, but he also knew his 5-day lie was also expiring, and Fremont's expedition expected him to return to Traverse des Sioux. Laframbo procured a large burlap sack, and soon the bones of the slain Tizaptonans were being collected. Nicollet bent down, and after removing some grass, he found chunks of coal in the topsoil. Hardly evidence of a fort. While they gathered the bodies and the 8 skulls, Nicollet pondered the bluff from all sides. Cleared of trees, it would provide a full view of the valley. An ambitious commander could clear the bluff and also the trees around it. According to the legend, Pierre Charles Le Sueur first discovered a great mound of copper vitriol hundreds of miles into Dakota territory, upon a river described by Baron Lahontan as the Long River. With a hired crew of nearly 20 men, they built a fort and then mined this strange copper, sending barges all the way down the river to the Gulf of Mexico. So this is what you were searching for? Joe Laframbo asked softly as they returned from burying the dead. Nicollet did not answer. Instead, he walked to the edge of the bluff, looking out to the east. With his hands on his hips, he looked down at the series of ponds found on the valley floor. Does this valley flood often? It floods every few years, covering the valley floor, Sleepy Eyes explained. There are many small rivers that empty near here. What is the name of the southern tributary? There are many rivers that flow from the south and east, Sleepy Eyes said. The Tuapadan, the Tuapataquian, Psa, Chenkasna. Nicollet nodded, a smile forming on the corners of his mouth. He ran across the expanse of the grass-covered bluff, standing on the southwestern edge, where he could see a river coming from the southwest east to meet the blue earth, flowing from the southwest. He laughed to himself only to see the looks of incredulity from his friends. A place where the water flows in all directions. Nicollet walked to the edge of the bluff to find a stick. In the dirt, he began to draw with the end of the stick. For 100 years, everyone has assumed that Baron Lahontan's Long River was the Mississippi, but the source of the Mississippi is just a series of swamps where the water slowly trickles over stone, with no mountains anywhere in sight. So next, I went to the Coteau, where the majestic ridge sent the Sioux River flowing south, the Red River flowing north, and the Minnesota River flowing to the east. But not only was there no Turtle Island, there was no sign of Lahontan or Le Sueur had ever been there. The distinct V of the Minnesota River took shape, and Nicollet began to fill in the other rivers. From this bluff, we can look out and see water flowing in all directions. The Minnesota flows to the south, only to turn direction and flow north. The Watonwan flows from the east, only to join with the Mikado, which flows from the south. From the south and east, the Tuapataquian and the Tuapadan join the Chankasna to meet at the base of this bluff. This is the place where water flows in all directions. Have I found the land of the Undine? At that, Nicollet walked back to the eastern edge to look down at the ponds again. "We must go before we lose our minds," Tiope insisted. "I am not losing my mind, Tiope," Nicollet insisted, and stared out at the valley for a moment longer. "But where is the white egg? Where is the water drum? Where is the philosopher's stone?" When he'd first looked at the alchemist's map, it transported him to a place of magic and wonder. But looking down at the valley from the bluff, the natural world stole every bit of magic. Nicollet went back to the drawing in the dirt and saw something new. The Minnesota formed the first pyramid, the alchemical sign for the Undine, the water element. The rivers flowed from the west and the east. The other rivers flowed from the west and the east, forming another pyramid. This one, the alchemical sign for Salamander, the fire element. At the place where they stood, these two pyramids came together, forming a new symbol, the symbol for copper. Copper. Just as the drawing of the waterway now had two meanings, Nicollet searched the valley for two meanings. What? 30,000 pounds of ore, the LeSueur narrative described. LeSueur and his men dug for months. Even with annual flooding, there would still be, at the bottom of the bluff, along the eastern side of the river, Nicollet spotted a small pond, and without explanation, he suddenly began to run. Chapter 54. By the time the others reached Nicollet, he was crying. "I must look like a fool to these men." "Professor Nicollet, what is wrong?" Geyer asked, crouching beside him. "We should pick him up and drag him away," Tiope said, "or soon we'll all be crying like old women." They knew what I would find. They all knew I would fail. Without the restraint of time, Nicollet knew he could have engineered a way to remove the water from the pond. But even if he did, and happened to find LeSueur's mine shaft at the bottom of the pond, he knew it would be a colossal waste of time and energy. LeSueur did not leave Fort La Houlier empty-handed. "Do you know, gentlemen, we are more likely than not the first white men to stand in this place for more than a century." Finding this place was no great mystery. They knew I would not find the Philosopher's Stone because it had already been found by LeSueur. The Makato. That is the name of the river. Makato Asawatapa, Sleepy Eyes repeated. The river where the blue earth is gathered. Nothing about the area indicated the presence of copper. But there is no blue earth. You said it yourself. The earth stopped bleeding long ago. To think, you allowed yourself to believe you were the Wishwee, wielder of the white egg. "Professor Nicollet," Tiope grabbed a hold of his shoulder, "we must leave this place." Nicollet allowed himself to be stood up, and soon all five of them walked to the edge of the pond, leading north to the Traverse des Sioux. Nicollet mustered no energy to stay, even though he'd most likely reached the destination described on all three maps. His victory had been hollow. There was no proof for any of it, let alone finding the actual Philosopher's Stone. Well, that's strange. Despite the tug at his arms, Nicollet planted his feet firmly so he could get another glance at the oddity. Brushing Tiope and Laframboise away, he turned. "Is that what I think it is? We need to go, Professor." It didn't matter that the sun was setting on the haunted valley. I did not travel this far south of to the far side of the world to leave empty-handed. He walked back toward the pond, studying the irregularity from both sides. "What is it?" Carl Geyer asked, joining him as the others stood where he'd begun his retreat. The entire valley was filled with soft sediments from 1,000 seasons of flooding. although the river was a few hundred yards away to the west. Nicollet could easily imagine spring flooding that would cover the valley floor to the spot where he stood, leaving deposits of silt while eroding anything that stood against the flow. According to Lahotten's tale, he found a massive mound of copper vitriol, where he planted a French land claim. The mound Nicollet studied was not copper vitriol, yet there it sat along the shore of an unnatural pond. The grassy mound rose almost 8 feet from the edge of the pond, with its base claiming an area almost 20 feet in diameter. 1,000 years of rain or floods would have obliterated the soft mound. 100 years. Laframbo, your shovel, please, Nicollet said. Professor, I agree with Tiope. We should not stay here tonight. The others will be waiting for us at the Traverse tomorrow. And if we are to avoid suspicion... Nicollet could wait no longer. Rushing to the edge of the mound, his fingers began to claw away at the grass until he revealed the soft sediment underneath. Pierre Charles Lesueur had found the same copper mound 500 years prior to Lahontan, but when he returned with a professional mining crew. 30,000 pounds of ore were extracted. This would be much easier if you were to lend the aid of your shovel, Nicollet prompted Laframbo. For the next 20 minutes, they all dug at the sandy mound like maniacal children playing on the beach. As they reached the original surface of the valley floor, a strange blue-green substance, only an inch or so in depth, could be found, marking where the excavation had begun 140 years earlier. Visita interio terra rectificando in venes occultum lapidem, Nicollet said as he rubbed the blue oily sand between his fingers. What do you mean, Professor? Tiope asked. Vitriol, copper residue, Mikado Asawatapa. This is the place where the blue earth is gathered. Hand me one of my 10 containers in my bag, Jim. I have evidence, even if it is circumstantial. Tiope quickly knelt and handed Nicollet one of the same specimen containers he'd used up north at Lake Manitou. He carefully scooped the vitriol into the tin and sealed it. It is no wonder the earth stopped bleeding, Sleepy Eyes. Someone dug it all up and sent it down the Mississippi. Yet 140 years later, madmen are still chasing after the Philosopher's Stone. If Lesueur found it, something went terribly wrong. With the tin container in his hand, Nicollet marked it with alchemical symbol for copper, and then, with English letters, he wrote a single word: Undine. Chapter 55. Jacques Palissy took a deep breath, knowing that the letter contained everything his benefactor sought. He stood from his desk at the post office in Albany and closed his door, turning the lock. In the decade since coming to America, Palissy had set up a network of spies throughout the postal system. Unlike France, where war had driven the radicals and subversives into secret societies, the plotting in America happened in the open. Imagine if we'd killed Nicollet, Palissy evaluated. The enemies of Manifest Destiny would still be hidden in the shadows. Now they came to the light of Palissy's desk lamp. Tuesday, August 28th, 1838, Mendota. To the Honorable Mr. Delhut. The Nicollet expedition returned 3 days ago to the comforts of Fort Snelling, and in that time I was able to gather the requested information about their comings and goings. True to his word and purpose, Nicollet primarily toured the watershed of the St. Peter River, which he now calls the Minnesota River. Thanks to the observations of my servant, the expedition cook, I also learned that Nicollet managed to visit another watershed along the way, the headwaters of the Des Moines River. Let it be known that at the headwaters of the Des Moines, Nicollet visited a lake with a distinct island, which he calls Chetek. Following the detour away from the St. Peter, He next went to the place where the Indians make their pipes, where Nicollet used dynamite to quarry some of the stone. My man closely observed the mining and claims nothing beyond the red pipestone was unearthed. He also saw nothing resembling copper in the process. After these two curiosities, Nicollet regained focus and mapped the great ridge before returning to the river at Renville's outpost at Lacaparo. While staying there, Nicollet behaved suspiciously when he departed with a single canoe to explore the region around the headwaters of the St. Peter. Although my man did not go with him, he was able to converse with one of Nicollet's guests, Dr. Williamson, who gave an uneventful account of what they saw. It should also be noted that Nicollet did not return with anything from this outing. In early August, the entire expedition returned with Nicollet traveling by canoe down the length of the St. Peter. Nicollet and the wagons reunited at the Cottonwood River, where he remained the guest of a Sioux chief for 5 days. After that, the entire expedition returned along the trail from the Traverse to Sioux. Although Nicollet's purpose had been fulfilled, he has not made plans to return to St. Louis. Although his expedition was a scientific success, it does seem Nicollet has found what he or we were looking for, and it appears has not found, and it appears he to be preparing to explore other watersheds before winter arrives. Your loyal servant, Hank. Chapter 56. Faribault Village, built at the confluence of the Cannon River and Straight River, was a collection of log cabins and buildings purchased by Jean Baptiste Faribault from a fur trader that had gone out of business during the summer of 1837. Although the elder trader had officially retired at his new home a short distance from the one built by Hank Sibley, he helped his sons build a new settlement away from the shadow of Fort Snelling. With the collapse of the fur trade industry the previous summer and a smallpox epidemic to the west, the region south of Fort Snelling had become largely abandoned, with even the Warpacootie band of Dakota vanishing. Miles from civilization on the edge of the big woods, Jean-Baptiste Faribault had decided to build his city. In 1805, after years of trading in Canada and Michigan, Jean-Baptiste Faribault had married Elizabeth Pelagia Aintz, the daughter of a British superintendent and a Sioux woman. With the help of his sons, Oliver, David, and Alexander, the village quickly grew to 20 buildings that housed several pioneer families and missionaries. Alexander Faribault was chosen to lead the ambitious effort of the Fremont expedition to map the wild Zumbro River, while Davy Faribault, who had completed his military service, would lead the Nicollet expedition up the placid Cannon River. With winter quickly approaching, Nicollet knew he could not afford to stay long. 2 days after arriving in Faribault, with a Faribault now beside him on the wagon, the smaller expedition departed to map the Cannon River. No longer did he have Laframboise, Sleepy Eyes, Renville, Ironwalker, or even Eugene Flandine. Fortunately, Carl Geyer heartily agreed to join him to collect even more botanical samples, but beyond him, Nicollet was left. Nicollet was left with the empty friendship of Viscount de Montmort, Captain Belligny, Big Bo Maxwell, and a surly teen Indian guide stands on clouds. After half a day of silence, Davy Faribault finally said, "I was told you intend to go farther than Lake Tatanka." "Tiope and DeSmit trust this family with my secrets. Should I?" "Yes. From what I understand, Lake Tatanka is the source of the Cannon River. It's the westernmost source. Our friend Tiope has also told me that the Laprelle River has its source near Lake Tatanka before it flows west all the way to the Makato River. Yes, the Laprelle starts at Lake Acamon." "Then I want to travel to the place between these two watersheds," Nicollet said, picturing the Lahontan map in his mind. He had found Fort La Houlier. Now he meant to retrace Lahontan's journey upon the long river on his way to the Undine. The wagons continued to roll through the grass hills that overlooked the flat prairie surrounding the Cannon River. After a prolonged silence, Davy Faribault added, "There's a name for that place." "The Undine?" Nicollet secretly wondered. "There is." "Yes, it is called Waseca, which means fertile land. Many of the Warpacootie gather there because it is so lovely. We'll make camp there. Where do you plan to go after that?" "I'm searching for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow." Faribault squinted his eyes. "I'm not sure I know what you're talking about, Professor Nicollet." "Nor do I," Nicollet laughed. "Do I speak plain with him about the clues I seek? The Seven Fires quest ends with a turtle-shaped island. I met a Sioux man who spoke of a place called Minnewakan." "In the Iowa Territory?" Nicollet had spoken in jest, knowing Chief Wahanotan resided there far to the north, but Faribault seemed to immediately know what he spoke of. "Surely it is not the same Spirit Lake." "Minnewakan is nearby. It would take a few weeks to reach it, but half the distance will be covered by simply following the Cannon River to Waseca." "How do you know of this place? Have you been there?" "No, but many of the local Warpacootie stay there during the winter. It is why our territory is now so empty. It is a sacred place to them." How many Spirit Lakes exist? Nicollet wondered, but understood how the secrets were protected by the guardians of the frontier. Faribault continued, "If we have luck on our side, we can go there and back before the snow flies. What's so special about Spirit Lake?" "It is difficult to explain," Nicollet said, and turned around to look at the wagons following. "What did Father de Smet say of my expedition?" "I was told you were a sheep surrounded by wolves," Faribault added. "If you want, Tyopi and I can bring you the whole way." "No, I must not raise too many concerns. I must play the role of map maker first and foremost. And you must play the role of guide, understood?" Davy Faribault nodded. The Cannon River flowed in a generally western direction from Faribault village. Never wider than 20 yards as it flowed through grassy meadows, it did occasionally open up to a series of narrow lakes. By wagon, it took the expedition 4 days to reach the source of the Cannon River. There, in an empty village once occupied by Sioux, Nicollet found his nerve to explain more to Faribault. "I am told by Father de Smet that you are a young man who can be trusted," Nicollet said that evening as the 3 voyagers prepared supper and the other men assisted Geyer with his botanical collection. "That you are an ally." Faribault nodded. "Don't be ashamed. When I was a young man and the armies of Napoleon marched on the town of Cluse, my mother stood me before a group of criminals," Nicollet scoffed. "They were actually Jesuit priests, but criminals to Napoleon. My mother knew these men would be killed if they were captured, but she also knew that we were being watched. So she stood me in front of these men and told them that I could be trusted. I took them through the winding paths in the French Alps and helped smuggle them out of the country. When I returned some weeks later, my house was gone, and my mother had been killed, along with others." Nicollet paused for a few moments, and a pale face looked up at him through the water. "So I ask you, young Davy Faribault, are you indeed a man who can be trusted?" Faribault looked over at him and nodded again. "Good." Nicollet patted his knee, stood up, and suddenly, and then, shouting out to the others, said, David is going to show me a spot where the Sioux buried their dead. We will be back in time for supper." Nicollet smiled and then walked toward the shores of Lake Acamon. "Professor Nicollet, I don't know of any burial grounds." "I know, but it'll give us a chance to be alone for a while. Tomorrow, as you know, I am going to unexpectedly continue on my journey to Spirit Lake." "Yes." "And you've been very tight-lipped the whole trip. My father would have respected your lockjaw. He always found me a bit too social. My younger half-brothers were much more to his liking, even though I made him proud by smuggling those Jesuit priests. I do not think the rest of my life's choices made him especially proud of me. But you're a renowned scientist. My father didn't put much stock in that. Before Napoleon came, he was a watchmaker by trade, and it always reminded me about the value of time. Now that I'm older, I understand how precious time really is. I wasted half my life watching the world go by before I actually went out and did something. Now, I fear, I don't have enough time left to truly do something of value." "You worry about winter coming too soon?" Nicollet laughed loudly, and then noticed Faribault's sincerity. "No, I really wasn't worried about an early winter. I am 52 years old, and I am feeling every day of it. I worry that I do not have enough time to unravel this mystery that has been set before me." Faribault asked no questions, but simply walked along with Nicollet. Massive cottonwood trees that towered 100 feet into the air wooded Lake Acamon. The trunks of these majestic trees were as thick as a man was tall, and as they passed, Nicollet put his hands on them as if greeting familiar friends. "I want you to look at this drawing for me," Nicollet said as he pulled the piece of paper out of his vest pocket. "Tell me what you see." After looking at it for a few minutes, Faribault finally answered, "This is the Cannon River." Nicollet clasped his hands together. "According to Lewis Cass, Zebulon Pike, Giacomo Beltrami, and Henry Schoolcraft, you are wrong." "So it's not the Cannon River?" "No, it is the Long River. This is a map made by Louis Armand d'Arcy, Baron of Lahontan. For 130 years, it has puzzled those who have looked at it. Do you see these headwaters? How they form two rivers that flow in opposite directions? Many people believed this was the source of the Mississippi River. Others look at this ridge where the two rivers form and believe it is the Rocky Mountains, meaning this is the Missouri River, far west of here. Some have even speculated it to be the Minnesota River." "But you think they are all wrong," Faribault surmised. "Baron Lahontan journeyed to a place called the Undine. Are you familiar with this word?" Faribault shook his head. "Good. Forget I ever said it. In his journals, he described meeting the Tanuglock Indians at a place where the earth bled blue from a great mound of vitriol. Have you ever heard of the Tanuglock tribe?" Faribault shook his head. "Or the Nasitares? Or Mozimlex?" Again he shook his head. Exactly what those who followed him thought. Only Pierre-Charles Le Sueur managed to return a decade later, finding a similar place where the earth bled blue. After he abandoned his mine, history lost all records of what happened to Fort LaHoulier. Experts began to dismiss both accounts. First, they claimed that Lahontan's voyage was a complete fabrication, and later they even discredited Le Sueur, claiming both men made exaggerated accounts. What do you think? I think we are standing upon Lahontan's map. I think these little hills are the cause of two rivers flowing in opposite directions. The Long River is none other than the Cannon River, which flows east to the Mississippi. Tomorrow, you will guide me to the other river, which forms this place where Lahontan met his fictitious tribe. The Rivière La Prelle? Yes. I've labeled it as the Le Sueur River on my map, just as I've renamed the Cannon River the Lahontan River. Do you know what Lahontan called the river upon which Le Sueur built his fort and mined the earth? Faribault did not know. He called it Riviere Morte. The river of death, Faribault answered, translating the Latin. Nicollet is the Sioux name. I assumed it was because of all the trees that plugged the river. I must seem like a crazy old wizard to you. The Undine, an ancient water spirit, a white egg, blue earth, spirit lake, turtle island, Wishwe, a great bear, a great thunderbird, a seven-headed dragon, 7 fires, 7 council fires. Have I gone mad? This is far more interesting than being home, Faribault admitted, which caused Nicollet to laugh so heartily that tears began to appear in his eyes, ending only when a fit of coughing took hold of his lungs. Thank you, Davy. You have put it all in perspective for me. Nicollet began walking back to camp. I am glad that Father de Smet recommended you for my service. Faribault nodded meekly. Perhaps I could have said I am glad that the Lord has found it prudent to send you into my service. You and Tiope are the only ones I can trust with these thoughts of mine. What about Mr. Geyer? He seems like an honest man. My enemies have taken a great interest in my work out here in the wilderness. Geyer is an honest man, but his loyalties are to science. Because of this, I can trust him with my life, but not with my thoughts. Food was cooking on the distant fire, and Nicollet stopped on the edge of the abandoned Warpacuti village. Even before de Smet's warnings, I knew my enemies were watching me. Men have long been searching for the Undine, and if I am not careful, I will lead them right to it. Do you understand my need for caution? Not really, Professor Nicollet. Faribault admitted. Who would want to harm you? What treasure could be found out here on the frontier? Chapter 57. Black Heron stood motionless, true to his name, waiting for his prey to come to him. Since becoming an adult, he and his band of Tzapton outlaws carried the metal rifles, pistols, and knives of the white man, yet he knew when to use them and when to use the old ways. He watched a young buck run through the gravel for a few minutes before climbing back up the sloping bank. Something is following it. If the young buck had possessed any sense, it would have plunged into the Nicollet River and fled to the south. But somehow it sensed a greater danger on the southern side of the river. It was right. Black Heron, along with his 3 brothers, 4 nephews, uncle, and 5 cousins, lurked in the brush during the day, wanting to avoid detection. A few moments after the buck disappeared back up the bank, a solitary young hunter, a sisseton from his clothing, followed the tracks and scampered back up the bank with a rifle in his hand. This boy will serve as an example to all who follow, Black Heron decided, stepped out of his hiding place, and crossed the river of death, hunching as if that would hide him from the Great Spirit. In a line covering almost 100 feet of shore, his 13 men, ranging from 10 years old all the way to 50, followed his lead. If the deer had run straight to the north and into the open, it would have stood a chance of escaping, although risking an open shot. Instead, it stayed to the protective cover of the woods surrounding the haunted valley, leading it to only one logical spot to emerge from hiding. So Black Heron scattered his men. 3 men headed back across the river to flank the boy to the west. 3 more climbed the opposite bank and right out into the field to create a pincer. The remaining 8, including himself, fanned out, knowing they would trap the deer and the Sisseton boy in the spot where the rivers came together. I'm going to delete that. The hunt thrilled him, and as he ran, he heard his lungs and heart working to keep up with the unsuspecting boy who dared trespass. Yet he knew already that killing the boy that the boy's blood would not quench the fires in his heart. As they approached the big westerly loop of the river, a single shot rang out, echoing through the valley. When Black Heron reached the edge of the woods, he found the Sisseton boy gutting his deer out in the field where the floodwaters had killed everything a few years earlier. Okay, I don't need to see that. In the distance, the tall bluff that had been burned black loomed to the north. If the other Tzaptonans heard the shot, they would cut from the open field across the southern base of the bluff, trapping the young hunter. Then the pincer tightened on the Sisseton hunter. Still focused on his kill, the boy didn't notice 4 men crossing the river from the west. At the same time, Black Heron and his men came out of the woods from the south and east. In the distance, just below the burnt fort, his brother's nephew came out of the woods from the north to help surround the boy. But 100 yards beyond them, a wagon and several riders appeared. White men. Despite Davy Faribault's warning, the expedition had left the ease of the open prairie to drive the wagons into the haunted valley. 5 miles to the south, the passage would have been tall grass and wildfires, but Nicollet's chosen path brought them to a place where a dozen rivers came together in a deep valley. Having forced the oxen-drawn wagons through the wooded ravines, the wagons again rolled along through the floodplains of the valley. Nicollet claims to trust me with the story of Lahontan and Le Sueur, Faribault evaluated. Yet the story of a copper mine is a fabrication. What else could they be looking for? The sun neared the edge of the valley when Faribault spotted a dozen Indians beside the river. This is trouble. The voyagers sensed it too and began to arm themselves. The young Sioux guide, who knew the way to Spirit Lake, stood in the circle of hunters, a prisoner. Oh, it's a trap. Faribault found his own rifle pointed at the chest of the leader. "We come in peace," he said in Sioux language. "We come in peace." The standoff continued as both the voyagers and Tzaptonans all shouted out strategies. Nicollet whispered calmly, which Faribault relayed. "We are friends of Chief Sleepy Eyes and Chief Big Thunder," he translated, "and we are friends with the soldiers at Fort Snelling. We have not come to take your food, but to bring medicine and food." As Faribault finished his message, he also realized he had betrayed Nicollet. "Tell the other white men that we will kill this man first," the leader said of Nicollet. "Tell him to climb off the wagon and come with us, or we will kill every man here. Our men are well armed. We will not allow our guests to be taken." Nicollet reached into his green vest to retrieve a wampum belt and put a hand on Faribault's shoulder, whispering another message for Black Heron. "Nicollet says he would gladly offer his life in exchange for us, but first he wants to know your name and why you threaten him," Faribault said. The rest of the men looked as terrified as Geyer and the Frenchman. but their leader remained resolute. "Tell Nicollet that I am Chief Black Heron of the Tzaptonans. Tell him that I will ransom his life in exchange for the life of Sleepy Eyes, who killed my son Ohanzi on the burnt hill." Black Heron pointed to the same hill that Nicollet had studied a few hours earlier. Nicollet tried to take another step toward his captors, but Faribault forcibly pushed him back toward the wagon. Does he have a death wish? For a moment, the two argued before Faribault turned back to Black Heron. "Nicollet wants you to know that Sleepy Eyes didn't kill your son. He says the spirit of No Soul took your son's life." Black Heron grit his teeth and appeared to be on the verge of tears or a suicide attack. "Ohanzi was killed in a knife fight with Chief Sleepy Eyes, who still bears the wound my son gave him. It was not No Soul." Nicollet then flipped his fop of gray hair to show a scar on his scalp. Faribault quickly relayed the message. "Your son Ohanzi gave Nicollet that wound up at Crow Wing River. In the big woods, Ohanzi killed women and almost killed Professor Nicollet while stealing his canoe. When Professor Nicollet looked into your son's eyes, he did not see a man. He saw the spirit of No Soul upon him." Black Heron kept his rifle pointed at Nicollet, so Faribault quickly continued. "No Soul does not want the secrets of the white egg to be discovered, which is why he drove your son to madness. The spirit of No Soul also drove Sleepy Eyes to the same madness when he killed your son and your friends on that burnt hill." Nicollet pointed to the spot where Black Heron had only found scorched earth. Black Heron lowered his rifle, but kept his hand on the trigger. "How does he know where Sleepy Eyes killed my son? Was he there to bear witness? Is my son's blood upon his hands too? Did he goad Sleepy Eyes into the murderous deed?" "No, Nicollet came to this place after Sleepy Eyes had killed your son, but the great chief of the Dakota fell on his knees and wept for what he had done. He understood that the spirit of No Soul caused him to do such vile deeds." "Lies." "Nicollet will take you to the grave of your son if you wish." After Sleepy Eyes repented of the deed, Nicollet convinced him to take the bodies from this haunted valley and bury them in a peaceful place. Black Heron dropped his rifle and rushed forward, gripping Nicollet by the lapels of his red jacket and slamming him against the wagon. "This man lies." Faribault found himself standing inches from the threat. "He will take you to your son's body. He also says that he is friends with Thunderface of Two Lakes and wonders if you know this man." The name seemed to hit the mark. Pain and frustration swirled on Black Heron's face. Black Heron released the jacket, but then quickly reached for a knife at his side. Stepping back a pace, he plunged the knife into the ground and spat at the hilt. "Thunderface is married to my sister. He was Ohanzi's uncle. How do you know this man?" Faribault listened with incredulity as Nicollet relayed the story. "The two of us smoked the peace pipe at his campfire. He gave me his turtle rattle, which is in the chest in the wagon. Would you like to see it?" Black Heron nodded, and his men grew tense as Nicollet walked to the wagon. But when he procured Thunderface's turtle rattle, his men began to whisper their theories. "Quiet!" Black Heron told them. "We do not know if this man is telling the truth or if he is a demon in human form." Then he turned back to Faribault. "Have Nicollet lead the way to my son's grave." "I must go with you. He cannot speak our words," Faribault explained. Black Heron nodded, and Faribault and Nicollet walked together away from the tense showdown. A narrow deer trail led south from the open valley, leading up a ravine that ran to the prairie. Not once did Nicollet try to run, and the farther away they were from the burnt hill, the more the tension dissipated. DeSmit is right. Nicollet is far more than just a scientist or diplomat. God has clearly sent him to heal the wounds that threaten to tear this land apart. As Faribault pondered Nicollet's words about No Soul and the white egg, he noticed the edges of the prairie begin to appear as the trees thinned. Climbing out of the ravine of the haunted valley, Faribault took a deep breath, which Black Heron did also. There, in a field of prairie grass, Nicollet walked over to a patch without any grass yet. There were several graves in the area. Possessed by grief, Black Heron dropped to his knees and began to shovel away the dirt. In just a few minutes, he opened the shallow grave, finding a rib cage. Seething heavily, he scooped away the soft dirt until he found a skull. Nicollet found the skulls and returned them to the bodies. In the privacy of the open field, with the stars above, Black Heron finally broke in front of Nicollet, allowing his screams and wails to fill the air. Faribault knew there was no way to tell which body had been Ohanzi, but the grieving father no longer found motivation for murder. Nicollet sat next to his abductor and put a hand on his shoulder, and for 10 minutes the two sat in silence. Faribault sat a few paces behind them. Black Heron studied the wampum belt. When the moving star appeared in the sky, the old men said Wishui would come, but I did not believe them. I only wish you could have come before my son foolishly died. You are indeed Watchkan Wishashten. Faribault softly relayed the message to Nicollet, but paused when he heard the strange phrase. Wakchan Wishashten? It means great sorcerer, Black Heron explained. Our people were given a task long ago. We were the guardians of the frontier, whose purpose was to protect our lands, especially sacred places like the Black Hills, Spirit Lake, and the Haunted Valley. One by one, these places were lost. My son believed that a sacred treasure had been stolen from the Dakota generations ago, and that it was his purpose to find it before the Wishui could come looking for it. You think Nicollet is this Wishui? I do not know if Nicollet is the Wishui or just a great sorcerer. My son was a troubled man who believed he was the hand of the Great Spirit. Anyone who tried to stop him was a heretic, worthy of death. I think the only reason he stopped himself from killing Nicollet is, even in his madness, he understood who this man was. What was your son searching for? Faribault asked. The same thing Nicollet is searching for, but he will not find it here. If he wants, I will escort him all the way to Chief Black Eagle's lands on the shores of Spirit Lake near the Iowa Territory. But he will not find anything there either. How do you know? Because Ohanzi went looking for something there also. His quest only led to his death. Nicollet was right about No Soul guarding the secrets of the white egg. I pray the Great Spirit that Nicollet does not die the same way my son did. I've already sworn an oath to protect him from his enemies, Davy Faribault insisted. Yes, Black Heron nodded. But can you protect him from himself? Chapter 59. Where there is smoke, there is fire, Nicollet thought to himself as he studied the haze on the distant horizon. Behind him, smoke from the campfire drifted and dispersed. Behind him, smoke from the campfire drifted and dispersed. That's a dumb sentence. I've put everyone's life in jeopardy. Things had soured quickly. After arriving at Spirit Lake under the he turned to the men at camp. I put everyone's life in jeopardy. There we go. Things had soured quickly. After arriving at Spirit Lake under the protection of Chief Black Eagle and his son Redcap, Nicollet had immediately exchanged gifts and medicine with the migratory Warpacuti. But the young Sisseton guide offended their hosts, and Nicollet reduced his payment and dismissed him. Along the far western tributaries of the Watonwan, one of their mules vanished overnight. Later, they found the butchered corpse of the animal with its eyes gouged out a short distance from where they had camped. Tyopi had immediately volunteered to hunt down the vile boy, which was granted, but the next day clouds of smoke filled the air behind them as the winds blew a prairie fire closer and closer to their location. Tyopi had not returned. Leaving Tyopi to find his way home, Faribault had immediately changed their return route, turning due east and avoiding another trip to the Haunted Valley. After crossing the Blue Earth River far to the south of the Haunted Valley, the threat of fire ended once on the other side of the lush valley. Yet Nicollet insisted they also camp on the eastern shore of the lake, just in case sparks crossed the river valley and reignited the prairie. "We need to make a decision," Faribault said loudly enough to gather up the 7 remaining men, who immediately did their part in setting up camp for the evening. "This mule will die if we don't give it rest. Even with rest, I'm not sure it will make it all the way back home, let alone Fort Snelling. Would it be possible to just leave the wagon here?" Carl Geyer looked sick to his stomach. "I have over 400 botanical samples in the wagon. If they are not properly preserved, this expedition will be a failure for me." "What about you, Mr. Professor Nicollet? Is it possible to leave your wagon behind and retrieve it later?" "How much later?" Nicollet asked Faribault from the spot where he sat exhausted. "If we are lucky, we could return with a fresh team of mules and have the equipment back to you in another month if the weather holds." Nicollet understood the grim realities. The supply wagon was almost empty, but was the smallest wagon. Nicollet's wagon had twice broken its axle, and they did not have supplies remaining for a third repair. The third wagon was stuffed with botanical and geological specimens. So Captain Beligny and the Viscount were sent north with Nicollet's wagon, along with Faribault and Clouet. Nicollet kept the other 2 guides and Geyer, giving the mule and himself a couple days to recover. With the Traverse des Sioux only 2 days away, Faribault and Clouet could return with extra horses and meet them at Waseca. "Would you be able to find your way?" Faribault asked before departing. Nicollet laughed. "My dear boy, I am the great sorcerer. I am the last magi. I am the discoverer of comets. As long as I have the sun and stars, I could find my way to Bethlehem if necessary." "And what if your mule dies?" That took the smile off of Nicollet's face. "Between here and Lake Akamen are 2 rivers, where we could hide Geyer's wagon. If your mule dies, we could easily walk the rest of the way by foot. Today is October 6th. We will depart on October 8th. We should arrive with or without our mule by October 10th. It is only a span of 5 days. I once spent 5 days trapped inside a glacier in the French Alps. I will survive a few autumn days upon the prairie." So the next morning, the other 2 wagons rolled north, while Nicollet and the botanical wagon camped in a grove of oak trees beside an unnamed prairie lake. Allowing the ailing mule time to rest, the 4 men found different ways to stay busy. Doyen went out hunting in the fields north of the lake, firing off a shot every few minutes before bringing back a half-dozen birds for their meals. Dagmar Forsberg stayed in camp to tend to the ailing mule. Nicollet stood on the shore of the lake, looking out at the wooded island 50 yards from shore. Behind him, he heard Geyer approach. "I want to thank you for choosing to stay here, Mr. Nicollet." "I understand how important your work is, Carl. I spent my entire career working for Pierre Simon, Marquis de Laplace, waiting for the day to replace him at the Paris Observatory. In the end, a much more ambitious, deceitful man stole it all away from me, leaving me with nothing. I don't want to see you return to Germany empty-handed." Nicollet patted him on the shoulder. "What are you thinking, Professor Nicollet?" Geyer asked him. "I'm thinking that island has a green hump very much like that of a turtle," Nicollet smirked. "The water would be very cold." "Yes, but there is a narrow isthmus just below the water. You can see the gravel bar leading all the way out to it." Geyer turned back to Forsberg sitting by the wagon, and Doyne plucking feathers from the bird. "We'll be able to warm our feet by the fire when we're done." "I'm willing if you're willing." Soon, both men were stripping off their shoes and socks, rolling their pant legs up all the way to the knees. Nicollet gasped when he took a step into the water and led the way. Surrounding them, big lily pads filled the shallow waters of the bay. Instinctively, Geyer pulled the aging plant up by the roots. The Sioux call this lily Tawapa. The lake is called Tawapatakian, or Lake with the Crooked Lily Roots. Chief Sleepy Eyes told me his people would come down here and harvest the plants. "Really?" Nicollet paused, pulling up a lily pad himself. An old flower, its petals now dry and rotten, fell apart with a brush of his thumbs. "For what sort of ailments?" "Not for ailments. To aid them in visions, apparently." "You don't say. Curious." Thoughts of Shagobay filled his head, and Nicollet tossed the plant back in the water and continued trudging his way until they found the sandy shore of the island, which had fairly steep slopes despite its small size. "Have I told you the Anishinaabe legend of the 7 fires?" Nicollet asked, as they began to study the red and golden leaves of trees surrounding them. "The Oceti-Sakowin? No, not the 7 council fires of the Sioux. I speak of their enemies, the Chippewa. When I was in the north, I met a wise old priest named Shagobay. He told me how his people received visions in the future, in a time when they lived along the Atlantic. For countless generations, the Anishinaabe nation steadily migrated westward, looking for signs and omens to guide them from home to home." "What sort of signs?" "Islands. They left their island home in the east and were sent looking for an island as their final destination. They called it Mizhike, or Turtle Island. Along their exodus, they would find an island where sacred migi shells would be scattered." "Migi shells?" "Cypraea, a class of gastropoda." "Aren't those tropical snails?" "Indeed," Nicollet said with a grin. "The Anishinaabe would search hundreds, if not thousands, of lakes and islands until they would find their migi shells sprinkled upon an island where there should be none." "It sounds like the stuff of fable, a trail of breadcrumbs." "It is more than fable. The Anishinaabe first traveled to Montreal Island, then to an island near Niagara Falls, then to an island near Detroit, then to Manitoulin Island, then to an island at Sault Ste. Marie, then to Madeline Island, which is where Schoolcraft's trading post of La Pointe is located. Yet their 7th island has proven to be a bit of a mystery." "You surely don't think it is this little island, do you?" Nicollet laughed heartily at the suggestion. It was worth cold feet to find out, but alas, no shells. Nicollet looked from the trees to forage over looked from the trees to the foliage over which they walked. You are the most enigmatic man I have ever met. Is that why we traveled to Spirit Lake so late in the season? To find the origin of a legend? Of course not, Nicollet smirked again. We were mapping the hydrological basin of the upper Mississippi watershed, Carl. That is, and always has been, our primary purpose. I can't tell if you are joking or are serious. Perhaps I am only chasing after fables and legends like Mr. Schoolcraft. No, Professor Nicollet. Your map will unlock the mysteries of the lands west of the Wisconsin Territory. Your name will forever be linked to these lands. Then why do I feel like such a failure? How could you say that about yourself? Look at how far we have come and how much we have accomplished. You are the pilgrim of science. When we return to St. Louis, we will flood colleges and universities with more scientific data than can be sorted through in a lifetime. Your contributions to science are unmatched in the whole of North America. Nicollet let out a long sigh and, having reached the far end of the small island, turned around to walk the same path they'd just come. I should have had a family. Beautiful Juliana Leaves wanted us to be married so we could return to England together. I would have been much happier, but I would have been a much better father than my father. I would have supported my children in any endeavors they pursued. Promise me you will marry Carl. Science is a lonely mistress. I don't know if I am ready to make that promise yet, Professor Nicollet. Nicollet put a hand on Geyer's shoulder and left it there as he walked. Suddenly, he felt a strange tingle in his fingers. He looked down at his fingertips, rubbing them against each other. He took his hand off Geyer. As they reached the place they'd crossed the shallow isthmus, Nicollet rubbed his fingers with his left hand. Cold, Mr. Nicollet? Cold. Cold, Professor? No, that is not it. My right hand seems a little numb, as if... Before Nicollet could finish his sentence, the little spots in his eyes grew until darkness swept over him. Back at Fort Snelling, old Betts waited at the ferry for her passengers to return. Jean-Baptiste Faribault and Hank Sibley had both taken the ferry across the river when the expedition returned. But little Nicollet had not been with them. Perhaps he is already dead. The old widow busied herself with a great basket of walnuts, cracking and discarding the thick shells into the water and dropping the nutty fruit into a smaller basket. All along the river valley, the leaves had turned gold and red, a sign of winter would soon be coming. After a few hours, the elder Faribault and Sibley came down the ramp to the launch, signaling old Betts to shift from one prow to the other. In her youth, she'd been so beautiful that the mightiest warrior in her village, Ironsword, had chosen her as his bride. Now, her massive hips became a tool of her trade as she walked toward the rear of the ferry. Her weight lifted the nose off the landing. With her long pole, she moved the vessel into the water a bit so the weight of the men would not cause her raft to be mired in the mud. Jean-Baptiste Faribault, Hank Sibley, the thief Maxwell, the bright-eyed Fremont, and Alexander Faribault joined her but paid her no mind, continuing their conversations as if she did not exist. With little effort, old Betts freed the ferry and began to lead it like a loyal dog across the river. Her second husband, a fur trader, had built the ferry long ago with dreams of filling it with pelts. After his death, it became her primary lot in life. The men departed without saying a word to her, but she knew Faribault and Sibley would later provide her with gratuities for her services, especially since she wore a cross around her neck and had taken the name Betsy. With evening approaching, she secured her ferry with lock and chain and returned to her little shack built atop a sandstone outcropping. She needed a walking stick to get up and down, but it remained safe from flooding. Finally, a bit after supper, the young lieutenant departed from Hank Sibley's house and sat upon the chair outside the Faribault house. A very good sign. The young man knows Sibley is a snake. When no one answered him, old Betts grabbed her walking stick and quickly descended the hill to speak with him. "Howcola," Fremont said in her Sioux tongue. This time, old Betts ignored him, climbing the 3 stairs, adjusting the wooden chair, and flopping down in it. Finally comfortable, she looked over at him and said in plain English, "They will kill Nicollet if he stays the winter here." Fremont stammered as he searched for the right words. "Dear Lord, I did not know you could speak English. Nicollet is in danger?" "I can read English also. So can Red Blanket Woman. The evil men know you protect Nicollet, which is why I have come to speak to you. Sibley serves 2 masters. One master is determined to keep Nicollet from ever returning. You need to make sure he returns immediately. He will not be safe here." "Who wants to harm him?" "The same man who hired Red Cheeks to murder him. The same man who hired Scarface to bring him to the prairie." "Scarface? You mean Tiope?" Fremont asked. "Tiope? Should I be trusting this young fool?" "No, not Tiope. The other man with scars on his face. The other young officer. The lion." Chapter 60. In the darkness, the Undine waited for him at the bottom of a deep shaft in the earth. At first, it appeared as the figure and face of Juliana Leaves. She floated bare-breasted upon the surface of the water, staring up at him. "Come join me, sweet Nicky," the Undine called out. Nicollet found himself standing in a sea of lilies, with the Undine looking up at him from a deep pit within the water. He managed to quietly shake his head. "Did you really think the Philosopher's Stone would be waiting for you on a turtle-shaped island?" "It's waiting for me somewhere. I found Lesueur's mine. I found Lahontan's river. I found the place where the water flows in all directions. Yet all you have to show for it is a tin of copper vitriol," the young woman said. "Turn back now before they kill you." "Are you afraid I'll find the real Spirit Lake? Is that what concerns you?" The Undine's icy blue eyes tightened. "No. You and I both know you are not the Wishwe, the one who will fight the great bear No Soul. You're just a boy named Nicky, aren't you?" Nicollet chucked a water lily at the Undine, but rather than allowing the rotting disc to strike her, she vanished, releasing him from her spell. Light returned, and the sound of panicked friends filled his ears. "Professor Nicollet! Help! Something is wrong with Mr. Nicollet." "He's being possessed by a spirit. What's wrong with him? He's having some sort of seizure. Help me roll him over on his side so he doesn't drown in his own saliva." Nicollet felt the muscles in his body relax, and the echoes of his friends filled his mind like a strange... and the voices of his friends filled his mind like a strange echo. He tried to open his eyes, but even his eyelids, like the rest of his body, were too tired to answer the call. He groaned a bit, but could not speak. "We need to bring him back to the campfire. I shouldn't have let him cross this cold water at his age. It was foolish of me." Nicollet felt hands under his armpits and around his knees. By the time they laid him beside the fire, Nicollet's eyes began to focus. "I saw her," Nicollet whispered. "Mon fiancé." "Who is he talking about?" Forsberg asked, already boiling a kettle upon the fire. A woman he once courted back in Paris, Geyer explained. Juliana leaves. She ended up marrying Edward Sabine. No, it wasn't Juliana, Nicollet whispered. The Undine called to me. I can see her hiding in the blue depths. You stay away from that watery bitch, Forsberg blurted out, gently slapping Nicollet's cheek. Don't follow her anywhere, understood? Nicollet blinked repeatedly as Forsberg put his face nose to nose with Nicollet. Nicollet nodded in affirmation. We'll let him warm himself and get some hearty bouillon in him, Forsberg said. And then tomorrow we'll leave for Lake Acamon if I have to pull the wagon myself. Soon, Nicollet felt the warmth of the campfire, and he fully returned to the land of the living. Forsberg handed him a bowl of soup. Eat. It will help you regain your strength. You must have had an allergic reaction to the pollen of the lily, Geyer offered from across the fire. Either that or you have experienced a bit of hypothermia after walking through the water. The temperature read 30 degrees Fahrenheit last night. So the water must have been fairly cold. Shagobay warned us not to touch the lilies, Nicollet muttered. But then he huddled beneath his blankets. How could I have been so foolish? None of the other 3 men knew Shagobay, and only Doyne and Geyer had been on the previous trip to the Coteau. So Nicollet kept quiet. Joseph, Carl Geyer began after the forest listened to the popping embers and the fire. What did you mean earlier when you said the Undine called to you? Dagmar Forsberg seemed keenly interested, making Nicollet suspicious of the voyager whom Jim Tyope had vouched for. Even dull Doyne seemed interested. You're German, Nicollet said to Geyer. Haven't you ever heard the tale of the Undine? Yes, I've heard the tales. When I lost consciousness, I had a dream that a beautiful water spirit tried to lure me into the depths of the lake to steal my soul. See? Forsberg nodded. I told you the spirit was trying to possess him. After that, Forsberg pulled out a big knife and walked over to a tree. He pried and gouged the bark of the oak until a word began to appear in large 6-inch letters. Lura. Lura, Geyer repeated. A Basque word for beauty and absolute perfection. A fitting name for a place where Nicollet had a vision. No, the gruff Swede shook his head. In my native tongue, Lura is a warning for a danger that lurks. I had to warn others about this place. The shivering stopped, but a fire in his heart began to burn. I've always tried to do what is right, Nicollet began, thinking of the face from the pit. I've never known a nobler man, Geyer said. For all my good intentions, I always seem to make things worse. Nonsense. Look at the impact you've made during your time on the frontier. You averted a war, you've immunized dozens from smallpox, you've become champion to a people who did not have a voice. My father was a watchmaker in the little town of Cluse. He honed his craft and became a man of esteem in our village. The Baron recognized how the ancient regime was changing and that a middle class of specialized businessmen like my father represented the future. For this reason, he proposed an arranged marriage between myself and his daughter, Cyrene. Your fiancée? Geyer said. What did I know of love? I was young. We both were young. I was going to be a watchmaker like my father, marry the Baron's daughter, and live happily ever after. Until the revolution came. My mother set me on a path by bringing a group of Jesuits into our house. I helped smuggle them through the Alps to safety, but when I returned, everything I knew was gone, including my sweet Cyrene. The Baron met the same fate as my mother, killed by the mob. Sweet Cyrene had been raped and thrown into a well. I returned home just in time to help pull her body from the well and give her a proper burial. I've never been able to look at another woman without seeing her face. It is the reason I had to deny poor Juliana's affection. It is the reason I will die alone, Carl." The next morning, Nicollet woke and looked out over the waters of Lura Lake. Content to let the weary mule rest and gather a little rest himself, Nicollet sat by the fire most of the day while Forsberg fed him, Geyer fiddled with his specimens at the wagon, and Doyen walked the shore looking for an easy meal. In the middle of the afternoon, Tyope came riding up into camp on a black horse. Staring down Nicollet, he said, "You look terrible." Geyer stepped away from the wagon. "Professor Nicollet fell in the lake when he had a medical incident." "Why are you just camped here?" Tyope said. "Winter is coming." "Our mule fell sick," Forsberg said. "We decided to give her a few days' rest. One way or another, we were going to meet the others at Lake Acamon with new horses from the Traverse des Sioux." "I assumed," Tyope said gruffly. "After I crossed back over the Blue Earth River, I found wagon tracks heading north, but counted only 2 sets, which is why I headed back south to find you here." "With your horse, we could get the wagon to Lake Acamon," Geyer noted. Nicollet tossed off the blanket and stood. "I understand now why Chief Wahanot entrusted me to come to the Haunted Valley. But it is time that I meet him." "It is far too late in the season to attempt such a thing," Tyope said. "We will be lucky to reach Fort Snelling ahead of the first snows."